Chapter 1996. The sale proceeded very smoothly. Meg was able to strike a bargain with the seller, and he was able to secure the house in the center of Rodu for 1,051 copper coins. "That's a bargain for you." The seller took the banknotes and left with a pained expression. If it weren't for the fact that Romo Street was going to be completely desolate and there weren't many ghosts to be seen in a day, how could he be willing to sell the house at a loss of 1 million yuan? Awesome. Meanwhile, Fitch gave Mag a thumbs up with an expression of admiration. He had paid Mag a fair sum of money, but he had indeed misjudged Mr. Hades. This was no newbie. He was more like a wily old fox than a newbie. "This is much cheaper than Chaos City. Should I buy the entire street?" Meg looked at the deed in his hand and fell into deep thought. "Mr. Hades." Fitch took the money and prepared to leave. Meg looked up at Fitch and asked, "How many more houses on Romo Street do you have?" "Ha!" Fitch's eyes widened. In less than half a day, the news that a mysterious idiot had purchased half of Romo Street had spread like wildfire among all the businesses on Romo Street. "Mr. Hades, you really have a good eye. I'm sure business on Romo Street will be booming under your management." Fitch looked at Meg with a glowing expression. He had sold more houses in less than half a day than he had in his entire career. There were a total of 100 buildings, and he had earned over 2 million copper coins just from the commission alone. He could retire right away, build a house, and marry a wife. "I also believe that will be the case." Meg placed the stack of deeds into a box beside him. Of course, he didn't need that many houses to open a tavern. However, after Mamie's became popular, the prices of the shops on the southwestern corner of the Aden Square had doubled in just a few months. It wasn't in his nature to not take advantage of the low prices to buy half of the street. "Then, I wish you a happy life. I'll be taking my leave now." Fitch bowed deeply to Meg before skipping away. He was as elated as a little deer. Of course, the first thing was to resign and leave this place, in case this cute fool suddenly changed his mind and came looking for him. Interesting. Meg smiled as he watched Fitch's departing figure. He turned around and closed the door. Don't tell me that idiot bought half the street," Eiffel said in disbelief as she removed the pipe from her mouth. "Although his brain isn't very good, he's really rich. More than 100 buildings, no matter how cheap it is, it'll be over 100 million. The fat boss next to him munched on sunflower seeds with a look of envy. TSK. I wonder why he bought so many buildings. I'm quite curious." Everyone chimed in, showing great interest in this new neighbor. Meg didn't stay in the tavern for too long. His main purpose was to discuss the tavern's renovation with the system. The tavern was about 150 square meters. Compared to the restaurant, it didn't need a kitchen that was too big. The wine cellar could also be placed on the second floor. It could accommodate quite a number of customers. "Let's do it like this. It'll be simple and crude. It'll feel better if I drink strong alcohol." Meg decided on the renovation style and went out to look for a construction team. Of course, the renovation would be left to the system. After all, there were so many neighbors around. He still had to find a construction team to put on an act. "Hi, how are you, new neighbor? Nice to meet you." A charming young woman walked up to Meg with a smile as soon as he walked out. She extended her hand to him. "I'm Eiffel, the lady boss of the Titan Tavern over there. My beloved concubine." Meg glanced at the Titan Tavern opposite him. It was decorated in the style of a giant. He politely shook the lady boss' hand. "Hello, I'm Hades. I'm also planning to open a tavern." The smell of perfume and tobacco mixed together was surprisingly pleasant. However, he still preferred the pure natural body fragrance of the young girl. Oh, if you want to open a tavern, you can ask me for advice. My skills are very good. Eiffel leaned forward. Her voice became soft and charming. She opened her mouth and was about to blow into Meg's ear. Okay, let's learn from each other when we're free. Meg dodged to the side and left. Humph, little guy. Do you think you can escape from my hands like this? Eiffel looked at Meg's back as he left. Her gaze stopped at his buttocks for a while. Her smile became brighter as she whispered to herself, his body is not bad. The construction team quickly entered the tavern. First, they dismantled everything in the tavern and moved them out. Then. There was no then. That night, Meg directly checked into the tavern that was newly renovated by the system. The tavern's main color was brown. It was basically decorated with logs. The style was rough and simple. There were very few partitions. There was a big wine cabinet behind the bar. There was a small kitchen beside the bar. It was about 10 square meters. It was used to cook dishes. Other than a wine cellar, the second floor was still the living area as usual. Meg didn't change the exterior of the tavern. However, he removed the original signboard and some of the fancy decorations and replaced it with a new signboard, Saipan Tavern. Nothing much. He just felt that the name was very catchy. Saipan, right? He felt it immediately. He felt that it would be popular. As for a small and refreshing name like Oyi Tavern, in a dangerous place like Rodu, it was best not to give people the chance to think about it. You finished it in a day. Irina looked around the newly renovated tavern and was a little surprised. I'm quite talented in this aspect. Meg smiled. Shameless. A line of small words floated across his mind. Not bad. This seat is mine from now on. Irina sat down on a high chair behind the bar. She was in charge of the tavern's finances and had a good view of the entire tavern. It was indeed the center seat. Ugly duckling, you can just squat here and be an emotionless fortune duck. Amy placed Ugly Duckling on the bar and nodded with satisfaction. Annie, on the other hand, was extremely interested in the barware on the bar counter. She fiddled with it carefully and her eyes were filled with curiosity. And, do you want to learn how to bartend? Meg asked with a smile. This bartending set was completely for decoration. He sold ready-made wine, not live bartending. He also didn't perform bartending for customers. Anne nodded. She pointed to the bartending set and said in sign language, I've seen bartenders on the tablet. They're very handsome. I see. Then you can learn to play by yourself. Meg said with a smile. He bought a batch of ingredients and drinks for bartending from the system. Then, he found some bartending tutorials for Anne so that she could learn by herself. Other children played with mud from a young age, while their children played with bartending from a young age. There didn't seem to be much of a difference. They were all just playing. Meg looked at the two little ones who were already excitedly preparing the bartending set. You can play, but you can't drink the bartending set. Of course, I can be your bartending tester. I'm quite professional in this aspect. Knock, knock. Right at this moment, there was a knock on the door. Chapter 1997. Who is it? It's the middle of the night. I just moved in and you're already here. Irina was puzzled. Maybe it's a neighbor. I'll go take a look. Meg didn't know who it was, but he didn't feel any killing intent or powerful aura. It was just a normal human. Meg opened the door, and a delicate body fell into his arms right away. A pair of hands even wrapped around his neck, and a seductive voice sounded. Mr. Hades, you're so naughty. You suddenly opened the door and made me fall into your arms. But I like it very much. The atmosphere in the tavern instantly froze. Father, danger. Amy's eyes widened. She didn't know if she should write today's diary. Meg looked at Ai Fei in his arms and his neck stiffened. He could already feel the cold killing intent behind him. Wife, listen to my excuses. Meg's mind was about to collapse. He quickly helped Ai Fei up and said seriously, Miss Ai Fei, please be more respectful. Love concubine. You're going to seal it just like that. Irina had already picked up a stool. Oh, Mr. Hades, why are you treating me like an outsider? I'm here to learn from you. Ai Fei's eyes were blurred. She twisted her waist and was about to pounce on Meg again. Meg quickly took 2 steps back. Ai Fei missed and looked up. Her seductive eyes just happened to meet 5 pairs of eyes in the tavern. An elegant and beautiful woman, a delicate and cute little loli, a beautiful little girl, a round orange cat, and a helpless Hades. Clearly, this was a family that could be seen with the naked eye. After being stunned for quite a while, Ai Fei suddenly came back to her senses. She immediately withdrew her hand and almost stood at attention as she revealed an embarrassed yet polite smile. Ahaha. I'm the landlady of the tavern across the street. I especially came here to say hello to Mr. Hades and his family. Just now, I drank a lot with the guests and was a bit drunk. I almost fell down. Fortunately, Mr. Hades helped me up. Nice to meet you, Mr. Hades. I don't think he just wanted to help you up. He wanted to help you all night. Irina said with a faint smile. The air seemed to become colder. This woman is not to be trifled with. Ai Fei glanced at Irina, who was holding onto the chair's armrest. She was also someone who had seen the world, and she immediately sensed the ice-cold killing intent, which made her have the urge to retreat. Then you guys have a good rest. You must be tired after the first day of moving. See you tomorrow. Ai Fei pretended she didn't understand and left. Phew. Out of the door, Ify let out a long sigh and stomped her feet in shame. Didn't we agree to be a golden bachelor? That's right. It's rare to see neighbors who hug each other the moment they meet, call each other beloved concubine, and even invite each other to spar with each other, Irina said with a smile. The smile on Meg's face gradually stiffened, and he said a little guiltily, It's not what you think it is. What do you think I'm thinking? Irina asked with a smile. Air. Meg was as thin as a blue mushroom. He felt even more wronged than Do-e. He looked at the 2 children and said, Look, the 2 children are still here. Father, we're going upstairs to play. Amy and tidied up the wine glasses and tactfully gave the 2 adults enough space. We're the only ones left. Irina picked up a chair. I think we can still have a good talk. Meg gulped. Patter. The chair fell to the ground, and Meg subconsciously pulled back his feet. He looked at the chair in front of him, and then looked at Irina, who had a faint smile on her face. Don't be nervous. Sit down and talk. Irina sat down on the high chair and looked down at Meg. Meg sat upright and looked at Irina, who was sitting on the high chair, and felt like he was being judged. Actually, I don't know her. I only met her in the afternoon and greeted her. She must have taken a liking to how rich I am, so she came to blackmail me, Mag explained. Go on. Irina crossed her arms and remained unmoved. You don't know, but it's getting more and more dangerous for men out there. There are always some women who approach men with bad intentions and try to take advantage of them. Although I've tried my best to protect myself, sometimes it's impossible to guard against them, Meg continued to explain. Is that so? Irina didn't seem to believe him. Meg was about to cry. If he had known, he would have used the mighty heavenly dragon on that vixen as soon as he opened the door. Then, he wouldn't have so many problems. By the way, honey, I've bought this street for you. From now on, you're not only the lady boss of this tavern, but also the prettiest landlady on this street. Meg suddenly remembered something important. He stood up and took out a box from behind the counter. He put it on the bar with a bang and then opened the box, revealing a whole box of deeds. His tone became more confident. Most women would say, "Honey, you look so handsome when you take out the box." Irina glanced at the box and narrowed her eyes. She looked at Meg and said, "Where did you get the money?" Damn! Meg cursed in his heart. He had been so calculative, but he had forgotten that the family's finances had already fallen into Irina's hands, and every single cent that he was spending now was his private stash. "Would you believe me if I said I picked it up? Do you think I would? I just got some money a few days ago. It's not much." "How much?" "That's all. Keep it well." Meg took out a mountain of gold from the empty space in the middle of the tavern. "That's all. It's really all gone. Are you sure?" "There's really not a drop left, Grandpa. We've been wandering in this mountain for 2 days, and we haven't seen a single ghost. Could it be that we're going in the wrong direction?" Noah sat on the steelback eagle's neck and said as he chewed on some dry food. "From the weak reaction of the turtle shell stone, we're going in the right direction. It's just that the path is very messy. It's not easy to find him," Melander said with his eyes closed. The turtle shell stone floated in front of him and rotated gently. Right at this moment, he suddenly opened his eyes and reached out to grab a humanoid talisman. "News from Mr. Mac?" Noah turned around and asked excitedly. "Let's go to Rodu." Melander glanced at the white talisman in the shape of a humanoid talisman. The talisman was quickly engulfed by a ball of green flames. "Really?" Noah's eyes lit up. They had been wandering in the mountains for 2 days. They couldn't eat well and couldn't stay warm. It was so frustrating. It was simply exciting to be able to go to a big city like Rodu. Chapter 1998. Find the culprit. "No matter who it is, I want him dead." Andre's furious voice echoed in the royal study. All the ministers trembled, and didn't dare to say anything. His Majesty's anger was understandable. The case of the ministers from the Ministry of War was still being investigated, and the results had yet to come out. In the end, these ministers' families were wiped out, and it was in Rodu. This was like a slap to the powerful Roth Empire's face. Furthermore, this matter also made all the ministers fearful. They thought it was very safe in Rodu, but they didn't expect that someone would dare to wipe out the entire family of a high-ranking official in Rodu. This meant that they could be the next ones to die. Andre calmed himself down slightly, and said to the ministers, "From now on, the Empire will enter a first-level war preparation. Begin to transport resources and soldiers to the front lines. We will be ready for war." "Yes." All the ministers bowed in agreement. Dismissed. Andre stood up and left. The ministers bowed to send him off. "Have you found out who did it?" Andre asked in a low voice as he went up the star-picking deck. "Your Majesty, from the traces left behind at the scene, it should be done by orcs. To be able to do this, it should be at least a 10th-tier orc. However, according to the investigation, the 10th-tier orcs were all in the Twilight Forest that day, so these traces could be faked." A shadow gradually materialized behind him, and a person wrapped in a black robe bowed slightly as he answered. "Oster, this son of a bitch, is indeed puffing himself up at his own cost. Given his guts, how would he dare to provoke me at such a time?" Andre sneered. The man in black remained silent and didn't reply. "Continue to investigate." I want to see who dares to do such a thing in my Rodu, Andre ordered. Yes, the man in black replied. His body gradually turned illusory, and then completely disappeared into the night. After handing over half of his private stash, Meg was finally spared from death. These two are really carved from the same mold. Meg looked at Irina, who was happily counting that mountain of gold, with a helpless expression. However, today's incident also reminded Meg that he couldn't casually talk about sparring with a woman he didn't know. Otherwise, it would be really hard to explain if she came looking for a sparring session in the middle of the night. Are you going out tonight? Irina suddenly looked up at Meg. Meg nodded. Yes, I've made an appointment with someone. I plan to visit the homes of the military officials whose families were massacred tonight to confirm if it was Josh who did it. Then I'll go with you. I'm more sensitive to the black fog. Irina waved her hand and collected all the gold, silver, and jewels on the ground. Okay, it'll be easier to find him with you around. Meg flattered him. Of course. The corners of Irina's mouth curled up slightly. Obviously, she enjoyed it very much. Soon, there was another knock on the door. Meg was surprised at first, wondering if he had invited other women to spar with him today. However, 9 short knocks and 1 long knock quickly calmed him down. He opened the door, and sure enough, Melander and Noah were standing outside, looking travel-worn. Both of them were stunned when they saw Meg, who opened the door. Immediately, they became alert. It's me. Come in. Meg had changed his face with the transformational mask, so it was normal that the two of them couldn't recognize him. Hearing Meg's voice, the two of them came to a realization and went into the restaurant. The warm tavern made both of them relax a little. Noah's gaze quickly noticed Irina standing beside the counter. His eyes were filled with surprise, but he quickly retracted his gaze politely and turned to look at Meg with a sad face. Mr. Mac, is there anything to eat? I've been flying in the mountains on the Steelback Eagle for 2 days. I'm starving. Meg looked at the two of them. In such weather, flying in the mountains on an unprotected Steelback Eagle for 2 days was indeed tiring. You can wash your hands and face over there. I'll make you something to eat. Meg pointed at the toilet at the side and walked towards the kitchen. Hello, sister-in-law. Noah greeted Irina politely. Although it was rare to see such an elegant and beautiful woman, he could feel how terrifying she was. It was a feeling he only had when facing his grandfather. This meant that this beautiful woman was already a 10th-tier powerhouse. Killing him was no different from stepping on an ant. As for Mr. Mac's strength, his grandfather didn't have the confidence to defeat him. The ingredients were still used freely, but Meg didn't plan to sell any dishes from Mamie's in the tavern. After a while, Meg made a plate of Yangzhou fried rice for each of them. It was simple and fast. Thank you, Mr. Mac. I'll help myself. Noah picked up the spoon and devoured the Yangzhou fried rice. He couldn't stop himself from immersing himself in the delicious taste of the Yangzhou fried rice. Isn't this too delicious? After licking the plate, Noah exclaimed in admiration. He felt warm all over and the exhaustion of the past 2 days had been swept away. I can't figure it out. I can't figure it out. Melander also put down the spoon with a puzzled expression. Grandpa, what can't you figure out? Noah asked curiously. Meg and Irina also looked at him with puzzlement. Melander was also puzzled. How can the food made by a powerhouse be so delicious? Meg was quite satisfied with this kind of flattery. If it weren't for the fact that he had an official event to attend tonight, he might have cooked a few more dishes for him and sat down to have a drink or two. Let's get down to business now that you're done eating. Did you find anything on your way up north? Meg asked the two of them. We found some scattered devilish aura, but it's hard to tell where it is. Melander shook his head and looked at Meg. You asked us to come to Rodu. What did you find? Meg said, there were a few massacres in Rodu last night. The victims were the family members of the ministers of the Ministry of War who were involved in the war against the orcs. Their methods were cruel, and they all set their houses on fire in the end. I suspect that Josh has something to do with this. He might have already returned to Rodu. Let's go and take a look at the scene. Melander stood up with a grave expression. Meg wasn't in a hurry to leave. Instead, he looked at Melander and Noah and said, this is Rodu. It's a bit of an exaggeration to say that 10th tier beings are everywhere, but it's not like the wilderness. You have to be careful. It'll be troublesome if you're targeted. When it comes to concealing our whereabouts and reducing our presence, I'm afraid there's no other race in this world that can compare to us ghosts. Melander's smile was filled with confidence and composure. Then let's go. We'll take a look at the scene. Meg nodded. In the night, the group disappeared from Romo Street in the blink of an eye. The turtle shell stone is very active. It has indeed appeared in Chaos City recently. Melander looked at the specks of golden light on the turtle shell stone with a grave expression. Chapter 1999. This is the mansion of an official from the Ministry of War. It is said that more than 120 people in the mansion are all dead. Only the official who was imprisoned in the heavenly prison was left. After hearing about the incident last night, he also committed suicide by hitting his head against the wall. Meg and the others were on a roof, looking at the scorched courtyard not far away. There is demonic energy there. A very dense demonic energy. Irina narrowed her eyes slightly and said with a serious expression. You can see demonic energy too. Melanti looked at Irina in surprise. Do you think this is a unique ability of the Ghost Clan? Irina curled her lips. It's just that there are very few people who have this ability. Melander shook his head and turned his gaze back to the mansion that had been burned to the ground, his expression solemn as he said, I can be sure that this massacre and the massacre in the Twilight Forest were committed by the same person. The demon Chi is of the same origin. However, he must have been in a hurry to commit the crime. He only absorbed part of the resentment and souls. If we can enter the ruins, we should be able to get more information from the ghosts. There are guards at the scene. Look, there are two over there. There is another one hiding on the roof. The surrounding area is surrounded by official mansions. After such an incident, the patrols have been strengthened. There are more than 10 patrol teams patrolling. Any business will attract them. If you are confident, you can go down and take a look. Meg said calmly. However, 1 7th level and 2 6th level is still easy to deal with. Melanti grinned. He took a step forward and disappeared into the night like a ghost. After a while, the 3 knights on the roof and at the door in the distance fell into a daze. A hazy concealment array rose in the middle of the ruins, making it impossible to see the situation inside. Concealment and deceit are one of the innate abilities of the Ghost Clan. Noah smiled and explained with a little pride. That's it. Irina smiled. This is already very powerful. Noah nodded. Little friend, you should see more of the world. Irina shook her head and did not say anything else. If it were not for the fact that he could not defeat them, Noah would have said something else. Not long after, the concealment array in the ruins disappeared. Melanti returned to Meg and the others. The 3 knights also regained consciousness. They looked around in confusion as if they didn't realize what had happened to them. How is it? Meg looked at Morant and asked. Melander's expression was solemn as he said, it is indeed the same black-robed man as the one in the Twilight Forest. I can't see his face clearly, but whether it is his figure or his attacking habits, they are all the same. Moreover, he faked the scene in an attempt to frame the beast men. Meg nodded slightly. The situation was exactly as he had expected. In that case, let's start looking for him. Perhaps he's still in Rodu. All right. Melody took out the tortoiseshell stone again, but this time it was slightly different. He injected a wisp of remnant soul into the tortoiseshell stone. This is a remnant soul of one of the victims. It's filled with resentment. This way, we can trace it back and lock onto this black-clothed man within the detection range, Melody explained. This method is really advanced. Meg couldn't help but praise. As the remnant soul was injected into the tortoiseshell stone, a twisted ghostly face appeared on the tortoiseshell stone. At the same time, a blood-red spot of light appeared and started to scurry around on the tortoiseshell stone. The golden spot of light that was originally shining faintly also started to flicker. 3 minutes later, Melody raised his head and shook his head slightly as he said, "I'm afraid he's already been alerted and left Rodu. Is there a way to conceal the devilish aura and then hide?" Meg asked with furrowed brows. Theoretically speaking, such a situation shouldn't occur. The tortoiseshell stone is a divine item. It has a very sensitive ability to detect devilish aura. Furthermore, with the enhancement of this resentment, unless he's powerful enough to ensure that even a wisp of devilish aura leaks out, he will definitely be detected by the tortoiseshell stone. Melody shook his head. If he starts to change his location after each shot, then it will be a little troublesome. Meg's brows were tightly furrowed. He had thought that he would have a chance to find Josh once he reached Rodu, but this guy had become even more cunning than before. The closer we get to him, the more effective the tortoiseshell stone's detection ability will be. Let's take a look around Rodu and see if we can discover anything, Melody said. All right, be careful. If you encounter any trouble, you can come find me at the Saipan Tavern. Meg nodded. Splitting up would reduce the number of targets. After watching Melody and Noah disappear into the distance, Irina turned to Meg with furrowed brows, and asked, "Why do you think Josh is doing this?" "He's obviously lusting after my wife." Meg thought to himself as he looked at Irina, who was still as beautiful and elegant as ever, even though she had disguised herself as a human. However, he said, he's probably become too full of himself. He wants to become the king and control everything. He's been hiding for so many years. Even though he's the second prince, he's already a strong contender for the throne. Even Sean doesn't have absolute confidence in being able to defeat him. Why would he suddenly do something like this at a time like this and completely eliminate himself? It's very puzzling. Maybe my kill warning provoked him. Meg felt that this was the only reason. Then what do we do now? Irina looked at Meg and asked. Meg grinned, "Let's go home and sleep. We'll wait for news. Just don't alert him. Look, the tavern over there seems to be pretty good." "I don't think that's a good idea. The 2 children are still at home, they should be asleep by now. I've set up a defensive formation outside the tavern. No one can get in." "All right, let's eat and drink." Meg nodded. 2 hours later, the 2 of them returned to the tavern a little tipsy. As soon as they opened the door, they saw Amy, who had her hands on her hips, and who was lying on the table, looking a little sleepy. They looked at each other, and the atmosphere was a little awkward. "Father, Mother, did you go eat something delicious behind our backs again?" Amy said with some hidden bitterness. "Ah. We actually just went for a walk." Burp. Although Meg was trying very hard to control himself, he still couldn't help but burp. "Yes, we had roast lamb leg. It was delicious," Irina said with a smile. "Ah. You're too much. You didn't even bring us along to eat roast lamb leg." I'm going to cry. Amy pursed her lips, and tears immediately welled up in her eyes. Meow, meow, Ugly Duckling stretched lazily, and casually exchanged a few meows as agreement. Meg went up with a smile, and patted Amy's head as he consoled her. All right, if you want to eat, Father can make it for you now. Spicy crayfish, roast lamb kebabs, roast beef kebabs, roast fish. Tell me what you want to eat. Chapter 2000. Supper was wonderful if one was not afraid of gaining weight. Meg put the plates and bowls into the dishwasher, and the cupboard would automatically send the dishes into the cupboard after it was done. Are you satisfied? Meg asked with a smile as he came out of the kitchen and looked at Amy, who was resting on Ugly Duckling's stomach. Yes, Father's crayfish and grilled fish are really delicious. Amy nodded, but she quickly raised her head with a serious expression, and said, But next time when you have supper, don't forget about us again. All right, I will definitely do that next time. Meg nodded with a smile. The children went upstairs to sleep. After washing up, Meg lay on the bed alone and opened the 2 shiny experience bags in his mind. The experience and information regarding the drunkard's peanut and the pig's ears salad flooded in instantly. After closing his eyes and digesting for a while, Meg pushed open the door to the test field for the god of cookery. Peanuts were a first-class side dish that went well with alcohol. Furthermore, it was rumored that they had a special effect of detoxifying alcohol. For example, if you had eaten 2 peanuts multiple times, you wouldn't have gotten so drunk. All these showed that peanuts had an unshakable position in the drunkard's world. Meanwhile, the drunkard's peanut was one of the best. It was as if it was custom-made for drunkards, and it had made a name for itself in the drunkard's world. The spicy and crispy drunkard's peanut was just right to be paired with cold and delicious beer or mellow and soft moutai. The stir-frying method of the drunkard's peanut was very simple. At least, in Meg's opinion, it was an extremely simple and easy dish to make. As for the pig's ears salad, after having the experience of making the spicy beef and beef lung slice, it was just as easy and quick to make. The whole body of a pig was a treasure. Apart from the soft and crispy pig's ears, the pig's nose and tongue were also first-class ingredients for the salad. If he made the pig's tongue according to the method of making bacon, and let it dry naturally for a period of time before cooking it simply as a salad, it would be full of flavor. Generally speaking, drunkard's peanuts would be soaked in cold water, peeled, and then fried in a wok. Then, they would be ready to serve after stir-frying with chili and pepper. As for the master's drunkard's peanuts, they were soaked in the spicy marinade for 2 hours, peeled and frozen for 12 hours, then deep-fried until slightly yellow. Then, they were added with dried chili and pepper to stir-fry until they were flavorful. After that, the fried peanuts were poured into the wok to stir-fry, then turned off the heat and added in white sugar, pepper and salt and quickly mixed well. The drunkard's peanuts made in this way were spicy and crispy, spicy and sweet. It could be said to be an excellent accompaniment to wine. A drunkard's peanut with a terrible appearance. Failure. A set of fragrant drunkard's peanuts, failure. A portion of drunkard's peanuts that are too spicy. Failure, alright, I've decided to take back what I said earlier. This is actually a very difficult dish. Meg sighed in exasperation as he looked at drunkard peanut, whose appearance was close to perfection, but was still deemed a failure by the system. The god of cooking pursued the ultimate perfection, and even the slightest mistake could not be tolerated. That night, Meg was tortured to the brink of death by the peanuts and pig ears in the test field for the god of cooking. However, as an excellent candidate for the god of cooking with excellent qualities, he still won in the end. Moreover, he used the remaining time to successfully experiment with the recipe for the cold mixed pig's tongue. A near-perfect cold mixed pig's tongue. Congratulations to the host for creating the first delicacy without a recipe. New achievement obtained, Imagination Replicator. Additional reward obtained, 3 chances to use the test field for the God of Cooking. Power of Faith plus 10,000. Host, please continue to work hard and replicate and create even more delicious dishes. The system's voice sounded, and a bouquet of flowers even appeared in the test field for the God of Cooking. There's a reward. Meg was a little surprised. This cold mixed pig's tongue was based on the memories of his previous life, as well as the experience he gained from the cold mixed pig's ears and sliced beef and tongue in chili sauce. It was also a newly created dish after countless failures. Just imagining the replicator out of thin air was a little exaggerated. No matter what, Meg was very satisfied with the sense of achievement of creating a dish step by step without the help of the recipe provided by the system. Looks like there are 3 dishes in Saipan Tavern now. Meg nodded with satisfaction, and then left the test field for the God of Cooking. When he opened his eyes, he saw 4 heads surrounding him. "Father, you slept in today," Amy said with a smile. "I'm hungry." Irina also had a smile on her face. In the past, she could eat breakfast prepared when she woke up, but she was not used to it today. And, on the other hand, showed a sweet smile, and used sign language to say good morning to Meg. Meow. Ugly Duckling rolled around beside Meg, and leaned its head on Meg's arm. One of its little paws pressed on Meg's chest as if it wanted to sleep with him for a while more. "Did you forget to set the alarm?" Meg turned his head to look at the alarm clock at the bedside. To his surprise, it was already 9:00 in the morning. He could not help but exclaim, "So late." Although the flow of time in the test field for the God of Cooking had been slowed down, it did take a lot of time to study the cold pig tongue after learning 2 dishes. It was already so late when he opened his eyes. However, it felt really good to be surrounded by his loved ones when he woke up early in the morning. Meg moved Ugly Duckling's head away gently, and got up from the bed with a smile, and asked, "All right, I'll get up to make breakfast for you. What do you all want to eat?" "Mother said she would bring us shopping today, so let's have a simple Yangzhou fried rice." Amy had already changed into a pretty little dress, and a down jacket was also prepared. "All right, wait a moment. It will be ready soon." Meg washed up and went downstairs. Soon, he made 5 servings of Yangzhou fried rice. Ugly Duckling took the initiative to come downstairs, and it smelled the aroma. Its appetite had been increasing rapidly recently, and it would only be satisfied after eating a whole serving of Yangzhou fried rice. Until now, Meg still had not found out what species of magic beast this fat orange that could fly was. He did not find out its combat power, but it was getting better and better at acting cute. During breakfast, Meg looked at Ugly Duckling, who was eating the fried rice with its head lowered, and asked, "Oh, by the way, should we change Ugly Duckling's appearance too?" A big, round, orange cat was too recognizable. If Saipan Tavern became famous, it would be easy for people to find out about it. Irina took a look at Ugly Duckling and nodded slightly. "That's necessary. Then let's change it into a swan." Amy swallowed her saliva. Meow. Ugly Duckling looked up at Amy, and suddenly felt that the fried rice on its plate did not taste good. It might be a little difficult to change it into a swan. "Why don't we change it into a panda? It looks like this." Meg picked up the tablet at the side, and opened a picture of a panda cub. "Wow, isn't this panda so cute? I want to raise one." Amy and Anne's eyes were attracted by the cute panda cub in the picture. "What kind of magic beast is this? Why haven't I seen it before?" Irina was also a little curious. Chapter 2001. Irina's disguise magic was quite exquisite. She successfully turned a chubby orange into a chubby red panda. She had black and white fur, and two thick dark circles under her eyes. Apart from her small head, she didn't look out of place at all. Wow, so cute. Amy picked up the dumbfounded ugly duckling with joy on her face. Meg looked at the flattered ugly duckling and said with a smile, as expected, hairstyles can change a person's fate. Now, a young man who owned a tavern had a beautiful wife and two beautiful daughters, and a chubby red panda. His perfect persona was born just like that. All right, let's go, Meg said with a smile as he got up and prepared to go out. Isn't your tavern open? Father, do you want to come with us? Irina, Amy, and then looked at Meg in confusion. Meg looked at the three of them, and thought for a while before realization dawned on him. So you're saying that you're going shopping, and I'm not included, right? As a tough guy, Meg suddenly felt a little hurt. Taverns are different from restaurants. No one comes to drink in the morning, and we usually only open at night. Meg explained to the three darlings about the difference between taverns and restaurants. And we've only bought this tavern for a day. If we open it in the morning, people will definitely be suspicious when they come in. Normally, taverns would be renovated in 10 days to half a month. Saipan Tavern was renovated overnight. If it was too outstanding, it would easily be suspected. All right, then we'll allow you to go shopping with us. Irina nodded. Should I be cheering? Meg raised his eyebrows slightly, but he was quite happy. The family of four put on their coats and went out. Wow, look at him. He just bought half a street yesterday, and he moved in the same night. The thoughts of the rich are really unpredictable. Wow, his wife is so beautiful. Wow, are those two his daughters? So cute. What kind of pet is that black and white round thing? They look so cute. The neighbors who were chatting and basking in the sun at the door looked at Meg's family and were all envious. They were shocked by the family of four and their pets. Yesterday, I thought Mr. Hades was quite handsome. Now, it seems that he's the ugliest in the family, a noodle shop owner said with a smile. In the crowd, Ai's face slowly moved back a little bit, turning sideways so that she could hide behind the restaurant owner's fat body, her face slightly red. What happened last night kept replaying in her mind after she woke up. The more she thought about it, the more embarrassed she felt. When she saw the family of four, she wanted to find a hole to hide in. Morning. Meg greeted everyone politely. After all, they were neighbors. They had to get along well for the next month. Moreover, he had bought half of Romo Street. The value of this street was supported by these neighbors. Good morning, Mr. Hades. The little girl is so cute. Did you go shopping with your family? Meg took the initiative to greet them, and the neighbors all responded. Ugly Duckling lay in Amy's arms and looked coldly at the stupid humans who tried to tease and touch it like an emotionless king. Come, smile, Amy ordered as she pinched its fat round face. Oh, equals intersection omega intersection, smiley face Mugly Duckling was forced to open for business online. Wow, so cute. I'm going to die of cuteness. What kind of pet is this? I want to have one too. It's round and soft. It'll be super comfortable to hug at night. The surrounding girls were instantly mesmerized, and they all started to ask about Ugly Duckling. This is a national treasure. Do you think you can just raise it like that? Meg laughed in his heart. He didn't know if pandas existed in this world, so he couldn't say it was dead. He only said that he bought it from a hunter. He didn't know what it was either. After a short conversation with the neighbors, Meg and his family left quickly. What a happy and rich family. I'm so envious. Yeah, but why did such a rich family suddenly come to the desolate Romo Street to open a tavern? We can't understand the thoughts of the rich. The neighbors watched as Meg and his family left, and the conversation was still about this new neighbor. The fat boss turned around and saw AI Faye standing behind him, and asked with concern, "Mrs. AI Faye, why do you look so pale?" Maybe I drank a little too much yesterday. I'm fine." AI Faye lowered her head and lit a cigarette. She took a deep puff and blew out a smoke ring as she looked at the sky in a daze. "You should drink less, too. Take care of yourself," the fat boss said. "Business is hard. If I don't drink with those customers, they won't come again." AI Faye sighed. Now, the Titan Tavern is the only tavern on Romo Street that sees customers. "Boss AI Faye, you're really good at drinking. I've never seen anyone who can drink you to the point of collapse." The noodle shop owner looked at AI Faye with admiration. "If I were to get drunk, those stinky men would take advantage of me." AI Faye chuckled self-deprecatingly. Everyone changed the topic upon hearing this. The Titan Tavern's business was indeed supported by AI Faye alone. However, if one were to say that AI Faye was indecent, they wouldn't say anything against their conscience even though they had been neighbors for a few years. Romo Street was located in the center of Rodu. At the end of the street were the offices of the various departments of the imperial court. However, it was exactly because of this that there weren't many residential areas around it. Most of the shops here were for the officials of the imperial court. The Ministry of War is over there. After that incident, they strengthened their defenses. Meg used his eyes to indicate the row of black houses diagonally across the street. "If you were him, who would you choose next?" Irina asked as she looked at Meg. Meg thought for a moment before replying. A completely random target would create more panic and cause the enemy to fall into a state of confusion. "I hope that's not what he thinks." Irina furrowed her brows. "He has two brains now, so it's not difficult for him to think of that." Meg shook his head slightly. "Father, are you talking about which restaurant to eat at today?" Amy asked curiously as she cocked her head to the side. "Yes, but we've only just had breakfast. Let's walk around for a while before deciding on lunch," Meg said with a smile. "All right." Amy nodded obediently. Meg flagged down a horse-drawn carriage, and the family of four boarded before heading straight for the busiest commercial center of Rodu, Tucker Marketplace. Tucker Marketplace was the largest marketplace in Rodu. All types of businesses of different sizes gathered there, and all types of food and snacks were extremely famous. Chapter 2002. The Roth Empire's brazen war against the orcs and elves made the situation on the Norland continent tense. However, the lives of the people of Rodu were not affected much for the time being. The shops of all sizes were still crowded with people, and the street vendors were also shouting enthusiastically. It was a scene of peace and prosperity. Compared to Chaos City, Rodu's commercial atmosphere and market scale were much larger. There were all kinds of interesting things everywhere, and the two children were very happy. Meg was reduced to a cat-carrying envoy tragically. He carried all kinds of things bought by the three women in one hand and a national treasure in the other as he followed behind the three of them. Gooses, gooses. 5 copper coins for a ring. Bring the big goose home and braise, barbecue, and stew it. Let's play darts and shoot wooden tokens. 10 copper coins for 10 darts. You can choose an exquisite gift if you hit a wooden token. Lively shouts came from afar. Goose. Amy's eyes lit up when she heard that. She pulled Anne's hand and ran towards the stall in the distance. Let's go and see what a goose is. Why is there no creativity at all? Meg looked at the game stall surrounded by many people. Although he was disdainful, he felt a sense of familiarity. There were many onlookers in front of the goose trap stall. There were 20 to 30 big fat geese in the small enclosure. They were squatting in a scattered manner, craning their necks and cawing provocatively at the crowd. A burly man threw the last bamboo ring in his hand with a sincere expression. The ring was about to land on the big fat goose in the middle. However, the moment it landed, the big fat goose took a step back and retracted its head at the same time. Sigh. That man sighed heavily with a red face. As he took out his money, he said angrily, "Boss, is your goose a spirit? It knows how to hide in the ring." "Hee, what are you talking about, sir? I see that your skills are getting better and better. Do you want to throw 10 more rings? I guarantee you'll get a big fat goose home. Your wife will definitely praise you." The skinny stall owner chuckled as he swiftly picked up the bamboo rings on the ground. One more time, one more time. The onlookers at the side also joined in the commotion. It was quite interesting to watch a person trying to trap a goose, especially the appearance of the person scratching his ears and cheeks when he failed. It was even more funny. The man hesitated for a long time. In the end, he gritted his teeth and shook his head. "Forget it. I've already set 50 rings. I can't even get a single goose feather. No one can catch a goose like you." The boss took the money and said with a smile, "Sir, look at what you're saying. Just now, there was a young man who took away 2. Our geese are good geese. I want 30 rings." At this moment, a soft voice sounded. The boss looked around before his gaze landed on the little girl standing in the corner. The little girl looked like she was only 3 or 4 years old. She was small and delicate and cute. "Young lady, are you the one who wants to throw rings?" the boss asked with a smile. Amy nodded with a serious expression and said, "Well, you have 30 big fat geese here, so I want 30 laps. Does this little girl want to destroy a big fat goose in a circle?" The little girl is really cute, and her words are also cute. The spectators looked at Amy with smiles on their faces. I didn't even get a single goose after setting 50 rings. This little girl is really arrogant. She wants to catch 30 big fat geese with just 30 rings. The man who had set the rings earlier also laughed. "You have to pay to set the rings. How about you adults? If you want to play, it's 5 copper coins for a ring," the boss said with a smile. This was a little fat sheep that had delivered itself to his door. Such a small child would have a hard time even picking up a bamboo ring, let alone catching a goose. One had to know that this batch of big fat geese had been carefully trained since they were born. Their circle dodging skills were maxed out. Even a knight might not be able to catch one, let alone a 4-year-old child. "I have money." Amy took out 2 silver coins and handed them to the boss. "Give me 50 copper coins. This." The boss looked around and was not in a hurry to take the money. If the child wants to play, then let her play. We saw it. Meg and Irina came forward and said with a smile, "Wow, this family is really good looking." "Yeah, the ugliest person in the family is the child's father." The onlookers' eyes lit up when they noticed Meg and his family. "What do you mean by the ugliest in the family? Who says that?" Meg rolled his eyes. Did these people think he was deaf? When the boss heard Meg's words, he immediately took the money and gave Amy half a string of copper coins, 30 rings. "I'll put them here for you. Take your time. Don't rush." The boss smiled and placed 30 bamboo rings at Amy's feet. Children were usually playful. If 30 rings were not enough, they would most likely ask for more later. It seemed like this parent was not short of money. "Okay." Amy reached out and picked up a bamboo ring. She looked at the big fat geese in the pen and seemed to be considering which one to trap first. The onlookers perked up and looked interested. Many of them were even discussing whether she could catch the goose. They had seen many people trap geese here, but this was the first time they had seen such a young girl trap geese. If the big fat goose stretched its neck, it would not be shorter than this little girl. Most of the onlookers were not optimistic about Amy's chances. After all, the little girl was already struggling to hold the bamboo rings, let alone throw them out to trap the geese. If we catch all of them, how are we going to take them back? Meg asked Irina worriedly. Irina glanced at the bags and ugly duckling in Meg's hands. She thought for a moment and said, if we hang them around our neck, we should be able to take them back. That's a little too bold, isn't it? Meg couldn't help but frown as he imagined the scene of 30 big fat geese hanging around his neck. Here you go. At the side, Amy finally threw out the first bamboo ring. The thin bamboo ring drew a beautiful arc in the air. Before the big fat goose could retract its neck, the bamboo ring had already hung around its neck. It spun a few times and firmly wrapped itself around its body. Wow, it caught the goose. This is too godly, isn't it? Luck? Strength? I'm shocked. Looking at the big fat goose with the ring around its neck, the crowd fell silent for a moment. Then an uproar broke out among the onlookers. Holy fuck. The big man who hadn't managed to catch a single goose feather after 50 rings opened his mouth wide. He was dumbstruck. This. The boss was also shocked. He looked at the bamboo ring firmly wrapped around the big goose's neck in disbelief. After a while, he forced a smile and reached out to pull the goose out. He said, "Look, this goose is really easy to trap." This little girl caught a big fat goose on her first ring. Luck. This must be luck. 150 copper coins. Even if you catch a goose, you can still make a profit. The boss tied the goose up and put it aside. He kept telling himself that in his heart. Here you go. Then, Amy threw out the second ring. Chapter 2003. The second big fat goose answered the call. Looking at the bamboo hoop around the goose's neck, which was as dazzling as a necklace under the sun, the crowd went into an uproar again. He's lived half his life, but he's still not as good as a 4-year-old girl. One might be luck, but 2 in a row, this should be skill, right? The boss is in trouble this time. She looks like bronze, but she's actually a king. The onlookers looked at Amy in amazement, as if they were girls who had seen a treasure. As for the boss, there was a hint of schadenfreude in their eyes. Many of the onlookers here had also used their own hands to trap geese, so they knew how crafty the geese were. This boss was very black-hearted. So when they saw Amy successfully trap 2 geese with just 2 hoops, they were surprised by her skill at trapping and were very satisfied with the boss's reaction. The boss's face darkened. He was so excited that his hands trembled as he pulled out the fat goose from the basket. He wanted nothing more than to throw this stupid goose over his shoulder. How could it be so easily tricked by a 4-year-old child? Trapping them one by one is too slow. Amy picked up 3 bamboo hoops and threw them out like a celestial maiden scattering flowers. Hit. 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 All 3 hit. Ah, Wei is dead. He passed away peacefully. The 3 bamboo hoops that seemed to be thrown out casually caught 3 fat geese. How can it be like this? The boss's lips trembled, and he was about to cry. 150 copper coins for 2 geese. He could still earn some money for the feed, but 3 geese were taken away at once. That was a pure loss. And what scared him even more was that this little girl had thrown out 5 bamboo hoops and hit 5 fat geese. It was a 100% hit rate. And she still had 25 hoops in her hands, and 25 geese in the basket, according to this rhythm, one bamboo hoop would kill one fat goose. The geese were in danger. Amy handed a few bamboo hoops to Anne and Irina and said with a smile, "Wow, this is so fun. Sister Anne, come and play a few too. Luckily, I can reduce my losses a little." The boss heaved a sigh of relief when he saw this. As long as this little guy didn't keep throwing them away, he might be able to keep a few for him. That's it. Irina looked at the bamboo ring in her hand and threw it away. 3 geese in a circle. How does this count? According to the boss's rule, if you manage to get it by the neck, then it's fate. These 3 geese belong to that beauty. Is this family a professional troublemaker? The bamboo rings flew out and wrapped around the necks of the 3 geese, shocking everyone present. 3. Congratulations to this beautiful lady, 3 geese in a circle. The boss's expression had completely collapsed. He could see that his 30 geese were not enough. On the other hand, Anne hesitated for a long time with the hoop in her hand. Then, she stood on her tiptoes and gently tossed the hoop onto the goose that was dozing off in the corner with its neck curled up. At this moment, everyone's gazes fell on Meg, unable to hide the envy in their eyes. It's so nice to live off a woman. What an enviable man. Meg held his head high and puffed out his chest, the smile of a successful man hanging on his lips. Yes, this was the feeling. The commotion at the goose trap attracted a lot of onlookers. While people were amazed by Amy and the others' perfect accuracy, they were also eager to give it a try. The onlookers cheered from time to time. They were already numb to the result of catching a goose, but when they saw the bamboo rings being thrown out from Amy's tiny hands and accurately hitting the geese that were trying to dodge, they still couldn't help but praise them. The boss had completely given up and was even more relaxed now. He loudly congratulated Amy and quickly tied up the goose that Amy had caught and put it aside. He would take it as a loss today. It was rare to have so many onlookers, so he would be able to earn back the money next time. There were still 5 rings left out of the 30, but there were no more geese in the enclosure. The geese have all been caught. If you still want to do it, why don't I stand here and let you do it? The boss said with a smile. Ugly. I refuse. Amy glanced at him and immediately put the bamboo rings in her hands on the ground. Everyone roared with laughter again. Not only was this little girl delicate and cute, but she was also very good at catching hoops. She was also very funny when she spoke. The boss's expression stiffened slightly, but he quickly smiled and said, "The 30 geese have all been tied up for you. Do you want to take them away directly?" With so many people watching, he couldn't do anything to go back on his word. Moreover, looking at the temperament and dressing of this family of 4, a small stall owner like him couldn't afford to offend them. Now, he just wanted to send this family away quickly and go home to raise the next batch of geese. Meg glanced at the big fat geese piled up into a small hill. Each one weighed about 5 kilograms. These geese weighed more than 150 kilograms, and they were still alive. Xiao Ai, we can't eat so many geese. Why don't we pick 2 of the fattest ones and sell the rest? Meg looked at Amy and said. He really couldn't imagine himself carrying 30 big fat geese. All right, then we'll pick 2. Amy nodded and went forward to pick up the 2 largest geese. The boss, who was about to pack up and go home, suddenly had his eyes lit up when he heard this. He stepped forward and said with a smile, "Why don't you sell it to me? It will save you the trouble of shouting." There were so many customers watching now. If he could buy this batch of geese, he would be able to earn back all the money he had spent on the geese today. "I can only sell you 10. If you want to replenish the number of geese, there is a stall next door that specializes in selling geese." Meg looked at the boss with a smile. These geese were clearly trained. That was nothing. They weren't out to do charity. However, this boss was a little unkind. The 30 geese had all been trained. The original probability game of circling had completely turned into a routine. It was a little too much to only enter and not exit. The shopkeeper's expression stiffened as he glanced at Meg with a guilty conscience. However, he still forced a smile and said, "All right, then I'll take 10 of them. 100 copper coins each, which is more than 20 copper coins higher than the market price." The rest of the geese were all bought by the onlookers at a price of 100 copper coins. These fat geese looked very good, and the price wasn't much higher than the market price. Therefore, they were very popular. Wow, trapping geese is so fun. I can even make money and eat fat geese. Amy counted the money she had received with a happy smile on her little face. "Come again next time," the boss said with a bitter smile. Of course, he hoped that he would never meet this family again in his life. If he saw them come to the market next time, he would immediately pack up and go home. "Let's go." The darts over there seemed to be quite fun. Amy put away the money and her gaze fell on a nearby stall selling darts. The owner of the dart stall was trembling. Chapter 2004. In the end, Amy decided to let the owner of the dart stall go, not because the game was too difficult, but because the so-called exquisite gift didn't appeal to her at all. If the exquisite gift had been a big fat goose, the outcome would have been different. Amy and played many games before stopping at a food street. They turned to Meg and asked, "This place is so fun, but I'm a little hungry now. Where should we go for lunch? Let's try some of Rodu's local snacks." Meg smiled. Irina had already put away the things he had bought, and the 2 big fat geese were also in a shop. He was empty-handed now, so he wanted to try some of Rodu's local snacks. Compared to those so-called food streets, local food markets like this were much easier to find local and delicious snacks. This was something that Meg had accumulated over the years. "Uncle Abraham, did something happen recently? Why do I feel like father doesn't seem very happy?" Vanessa sat in the horse-drawn carriage and asked Abraham. "Children shouldn't worry about these things. The most important thing now is where we're going for lunch. I heard that a good beef restaurant opened in Tucker City recently. I'll take you there to try it." Abraham changed the subject with a smile. He had just returned to Rhoda yesterday, and was going to the palace to meet the king today. He also wanted to take Vanessa out to play. This little glutton hadn't left the palace in a while. "Chaos City is so good, why did you come back? Is Mamie's not good enough?" Vanessa was a little perplexed. "Mr. Mac took Amy out to play, so Mamie's closed for a month." Abraham heaved a faint sigh, and said, "Do you think I wanted to come back? Mamie's is too good." "Is that so?" Vanessa was also a little surprised to hear that. However, a smile then appeared on her face, and she said, "That's true. Mr. Mac dotes on little Amy the most, so there's no reason for him not to spend some time with her during the winter break. That's why I thought of it as a winter break for myself. I'll come back and play for a while." Abraham nodded. "Then you have to take me with you when school reopens. I also want to eat hot pot, red braised pork, spicy grilled fish." Vanessa looked at Abraham with a pitiable expression. "That will depend on your father's approval. After all, this kind of thing requires the approval of the parents, right?" Abraham smiled. "I'm so pitiful." Vanessa sighed as she looked out of the window with a melancholic expression. "All right, I'll talk to His Majesty when the time comes. If he agrees, I'll take you there." Abraham smiled. Vanessa immediately smiled happily, and nodded. "Hee, I knew Uncle Abraham is the best." Vanessa's to Rodu's to Vanessa. The two of them got off the carriage. This was a big restaurant that opened at the entrance of the market square. It was a 3-story building, and all of it belonged to this beef restaurant. Let's go, I've already reserved a table. Abraham led the way toward the restaurant. As soon as they reached the entrance, the owner of the restaurant came up to them with a fawning smile on his face. He led Abraham and Vanessa into the restaurant, and they went straight to an exquisite private room on the 2nd floor. Wasn't that big sister Vanessa and Fat Eagle's grandfather who just went upstairs? Amy asked with a hint of surprise as she held a beef bone in her hand. That's right, but we have to pretend that we don't know anyone, so we don't know who they are, Meg said with a smile. He had also noticed Abraham and Vanessa going upstairs. They ate at the snack street, but the little fellow was not full, so they went to this newly opened beef restaurant to have another meal under the recommendation of others. Oh, okay. Amy nodded with a thoughtful expression before continuing to eat her beef soup. The taste of this beef restaurant was actually very ordinary, at least in Meg's eyes. However, judging from the reviews of the surrounding customers, this was a restaurant that could establish itself in Rodu. Amy gulped down her bowl of beef soup before looking up at Meg. Can I have another bowl of soup? Of course. Meg beckoned the waitress over with a smile before adding another bowl of beef soup for Amy. After lunch, the whole family played in the market for the whole afternoon. The two kids are so happy. Irina smiled as she looked at Amy and Anne, who were each holding a lollipop in their hands as they sat on a simple swing in the corner of the market. Are you happy? Meg asked. Irina turned to look at him before suddenly reaching out to pinch his face. A smile spread across her exquisite face as she said, I'm happy. I'm also very happy, Meg said with a smile. As long as he was with the person he loved, living a simple life in a small market, he would still feel happy and blissful. What a wonderful experience this was. No matter how much money he had in his previous life, no matter how many people he was surrounded by, he still felt out of place in this world and couldn't feel happy for a long time. However, even though he still had a lot of money now, as long as the person he loved was by his side, he could feel happiness at any time. What kind of alcohol are you selling tonight? Beer? After returning to the tavern, Irina looked at Meg, who was preparing in the kitchen. No, it's 2 new types of alcohol, Moutai and whiskey. Beer is not suitable to be sold in taverns as it would easily arouse suspicion, Meg replied in the kitchen. Moutai. Whiskey. Irina had a puzzled look on her face as she had never heard of these 2 types of alcohol. It's a new type of alcohol that I brewed. I originally planned to launch it at Mamie's, but now it seems that it's suitable for Saipan Tavern. Meg poked his head out to explain while pointing to the 2 rows of small white porcelain wine jars in the corner of the wine cabinet. That's Moutai. If you're interested, you can try it during dinner. I'll try it. I won't get drunk even after 1,000 cups. Irina waved her hand and a small white porcelain wine jar fell into her hand. This small wine jar was round and the surface was as smooth as jade. Whether it was the shape or the material, it looked very delicate and pleasant. The small mouth of the wine jar was sealed with a piece of red cloth and a red rope was tied around the mouth. It was quite unique. Irina reached out to untie the rope and lifted the red cloth. There was a wooden cork underneath and a faint aroma of alcohol slowly drifted out. This aroma is very special. Irina's nose twitched as her eyes lit up. Although she wasn't a big drinker, Irina's alcohol tolerance was indeed quite good. When they were traveling the continent back then, both of them were people who had tasted all the fine wines from all over the Norland continent. This wine aroma was very special. It was even more fragrant than rum. Just a whiff was enough to make one feel a little intoxicated. Pop! Irina pulled out the cork almost without hesitation. Chapter 2005. The strong aroma of the wine suddenly overflowed. The mellow aroma was completely different from the fragrance of the beer. The aroma of the wine seeped into the heart and spleen. Just by smelling it, one would feel a little tipsy. This wine is really good. Meg, who was in the kitchen, also smelled the aroma of the wine. His eyes lit up and he couldn't help but praise. This wine was actually not brewed by him. Mao Tai was not beer. There was no such thing as brewing on the spot. Years of cellaring, years or even decades of base wine, and various complicated details of the brewing process, the choice of seasons, etc., all had great limitations. The opening of the Saipan Tavern was imminent. Naturally, Meg couldn't wait a few years for the wine to be brewed. So he directly bought a batch of Mao Tai and whiskey from the system. As for the Mao Tai and whiskey distillery, Meg planned to let Hannah do it after her rum factory ran smoothly and entered the mass production stage. This Mao Tai, according to the system, was the best Mao Tai wine brewed with the highest standards by restoring the ancient brewing method and adding the modern ultimate brewing technology. Meg didn't like white wine, but he drank Mao Tai a few times at the drinking parties of the elders. In terms of aroma, the Mao Tai wine produced by the system really crushed the ones he drank on the table. Just the aroma alone made him a little tipsy. Don't drink in a hurry. I'll get you something to go with the wine. Meg looked at Irina, who was holding the wine bottle and was about to drink it directly, and said, "There's something to go with the wine." Irina was a little surprised, but she still took the wine bottle and sat down at the table. After a while, Meg came out with a small tray. On it was a drunkard's peanut, a cold pig's ear, a cold pig's tongue, and a small wine glass. They are all new dishes. When did you secretly learn them behind my back? Irina looked at the 3 dishes and was a little surprised. That's not learning, that's creating. Meg calmly picked up the wine bottle and poured a glass of Mao Tai for Irina. This wine is easy to get drunk. It's different from beer. Drink it slowly and taste it slowly. Don't you want to sit and drink with me? Irina looked at the only glass and then looked up at Meg and said, "Today is the first day of the tavern's opening. I won't be able to receive customers if I get drunk later." Meg smiled and shook his head. He wasn't arrogant enough to think that he could drink 1,000 glasses of white wine. As a tavern owner with professional ethics, in order to provide professional service to his customers. When he was at work. "All right, then I'll drink alone." Irina raised her glass and took a small sip. Mao Tai's, Irina was Mao Tai, but it was still s. However, her brows soon relaxed, and the refreshing taste began to bloom in her mouth. The mellow wine made one want to explore and analyze the fragrance. The aroma of the grain, the aroma of the cellar, the sweetness of fermentation, all kinds of aromas overwhelmed her. If the beer was a little girl wearing skimpy clothes, then Mao Tai was a young married woman who was still holding a pipa and covering half of her face. If you took away the pipa, there might be a veil behind it. After a long time, Irina opened her eyes. The aftertaste lingered in her mouth. "This wine is amazing," Irina praised. Different from the refreshing fruit wine that was as sweet as fruit juice and the refreshing beer, this Mao Tai wine let her know for the first time that wine could indeed be tasted slowly. The elegant and delicate taste was hard to resist. Don't just drink wine. Eat some dishes, Meg reminded Irina, who was about to take another sip of wine. Won't I get drunk if I have a peanut? Irina picked up her chopsticks, picked up a drunkard peanut, and threw it into her mouth. Crack! Her teeth collided with the peanut, making a soft sound. It's actually crispy. Irina had eaten the salted peanuts of the goblins before, but she had never felt anything about the soft texture. However, this peeled peanut was actually crispy. Then, the crispness exploded in her mouth. The numbness of the pepper, the spiciness of the chili, the fragrance of the pepper, and all kinds of spices were released as she chewed. Scum, 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 these peanuts are so fragrant. Irina looked up at Meg and threw another peanut into her mouth. The corners of her mouth curled up slightly, revealing a happy smile. That look seemed to be saying, "My husband is the best." Of course. You don't have to look at who made it. Meg's mouth also curled up crazily. A small serving of drunkard peanuts was the condensed manifestation of culinary skills. It represented a king-level expert who went with wine. I didn't expect Romo Street to become so desolate. A middle-aged man in a black robe walked on the streets of Romo Street and sighed softly as he looked at the closed shops on both sides of the street. Bobby was an official of the Ministry of War. Many things had happened in the Ministry of War in the past 2 days, causing this originally majestic department to become quite miserable overnight. The Ministry of War was surrounded for 3 whole days, and many officials were taken away for questioning. Even someone like him, who was completely idle, was taken away for questioning. He was only allowed to return to the Ministry of War to continue working today. Yesterday, he heard about the massacre that happened in Rodu. His most respected superior was killed. After hearing the news last night, he also went to meet his death. Things were unpredictable. Bobby finished the work at hand, and didn't want to go home. He planned to go to Romo Street to drink some wine first. However, the tavern that he frequented with his superior a few years ago had closed. A few familiar restaurants and taverns were also gone, leaving only empty shops. Sigh. Bobby sighed and glanced at the lively Titan Tavern in the distance. He had heard of the tavern. The wine was ordinary, but the lady boss was a quite beautiful woman. He just wanted to drink quietly alone, but now it seemed that there was no better choice. Just as he was about to walk towards the Titan Tavern across the street, a faint fragrance stopped him in his tracks. He frowned slightly and sniffed hard again. Is this the fragrance of wine? Bobby's face showed a little surprise and uncertainty. This fragrance was too tempting. After a little hesitation, he followed the fragrance. Not long after, he saw a tavern with lights on. This tavern is still here. Bobby was a little surprised, but after seeing the signboard, he realized, it turns out that the boss has changed. However, as he approached this tavern, the fragrance of wine became stronger. If his initial purpose was just to get drunk, now he wanted to taste this wine that exuded a tempting fragrance and let himself be intoxicated in this wine. It seemed that the tavern was already open for business, so he reached out, pushed the door open, and walked in. The layout of the tavern was completely different from the original. The open hall looked simple and generous. The tan log style made people feel comfortable and natural. Bobby's gaze had been attracted by the only guest in the tavern. Oh no, it should be the small crystal cup in front of her. The strong fragrance of wine came from it. Chapter 2006. Bobby was fond of alcohol. This habit was formed after he entered the Ministry of War from his superior. This senior was a renowned drinker in the Ministry of War, and was very particular about drinking. There were probably very few people who knew better than him which tavern in Rhoda had the best wine. Bobby had also drunk a lot of good wine over the years with this senior. Based on his senior's experience, those taverns that were popular usually didn't have good wine. This was because the real good wine had to be brewed very carefully and stored in a strict cellar. If they didn't have their own winery, ordinary tavern owners wouldn't brew much wine themselves. Just like the Titan Tavern that became famous because of the lady boss, the wine was very ordinary. However, not everyone cared about the quality of the wine when it came to drinking. Many people cared about the atmosphere and who they were drinking with. If the senior was still around, He would be very happy even if he had a bottle of low-quality fruit wine sitting by the roadside. Of course, if the senior was here, he would be very happy to find another good wine in this newly opened tavern. Meg also noticed this customer who came in. He could tell from his familiar uniform that he was an official from the Ministry of War. However, his position wasn't high, and he looked exhausted. His eyes were bloodshot as if he didn't have a good rest. It wasn't difficult to understand his appearance from the experience of the Ministry of War in the past few days. Even the fact that he could come here to drink at this time meant that he was indeed a little far from the coarse circle of power in the Ministry of War. "Hello, what would you like to drink?" Meg asked as he stood behind the bar counter. Bobby came back to his senses and looked at Meg. He pointed to the wine glass in front of Irina and said, "Please give me a bottle of the same wine as that lady. Moutai wine, 2,000 copper coins a bottle. There are also side dishes here. Do you want it?" Meg hinted at the price. The income of the Roth Empire's officials wasn't very high. For example, this uncle who was experiencing a midlife crisis had an income of about 10,000 copper coins a month. It wasn't absolute that he would spend 2,000 copper coins on a bottle of Moutai wine, 2,000 copper coins. Bobby frowned slightly. This price was indeed much more expensive than the wine he usually drank. Even the wine that the lady boss of the Titan Tavern sent to him personally was only 50 copper coins a glass. "Yes." Meg nodded, maintaining the appropriate temperature and distance. Bobby thought for a moment and said, "I'll take a bottle and a serving of Drunkard's peanuts. Give me 2 glasses." Compared to the Moutai wine and whiskey that cost 2,000 copper coins per bottle, the Drunkard's peanut that cost 30 copper coins per bottle was much more affordable. Bobby didn't have much of an appetite, so he didn't order the other 2 strange dishes. Pig's ears and pig's tongue. Aren't these things only slum dwellers take home to cook and eat? All right. Meg nodded slightly, took a bottle of Moutai wine from the wine cabinet, took 2 wine glasses, poured a stack of Drunkard's peanuts, and sent them to the Bobby table at the door. "Please enjoy." "Thank you." Bobby nodded slightly and picked up the round white bottle. The bottle felt very smooth and delicate. He untied the seal on the bottle, and there was a cork inside. What an expert. If the senior was here, he would definitely praise him. Senior was not here, so Bobby praised him for him. He pulled out the cork, and the strong fragrance of the wine suddenly came. Although the restaurant had been filled with the fragrance of the fragrance of the wine from the bottle still made his eyes light up. This wasn't fruit wine. It didn't have a fruity fragrance, but it had a mellow and lingering aroma. It should be grain wine. However, he had drunk many grain wines, but none of them had such a mellow and serene aroma. The wine was poured into the glass, and the color was clear and transparent, reflecting the light in the crystal glass. The senior said that good wine must be matched with a good wine set. If such a clear and transparent wine was poured into an ordinary pottery cup, it would not be seen. But when it was poured into this clean and transparent crystal glass, it was purer than crystal, and it looked more high-end. How is this done? Bobby looked incredible. Whether it was a fruit wine or a grain wine, no matter how it was filtered, it would inevitably leave some impurities in the wine. Even if there were very few impurities, the color of the wine would never be transparent. It looked like a glass of freshly poured mountain spring water. If it weren't for the intoxicating wine fragrance in the small glass in front of him, Bobby couldn't believe that this was a glass of wine. "Senior, you have taken me to drink so many good wines. You must have not drunk this wine today. I will pour you a glass and try it." Bobby put the glass of wine on the opposite side. He was silent for a while before he poured himself another glass. Irina, who had drunk 2 glasses of wine, was already a little blurred. She looked back at Bobby, and her beautiful legs were slightly wrinkled. She then looked at Meg and raised her eyebrows. Meg shook his head slightly, indicating that he didn't know what the middle-aged man was doing, but it seemed that he was not waiting for a living person. It might be a little scary to say that. It should be said that he came to drink with the dead. Oh, no, it should be to remember the senior. Many people from the Ministry of War had died these days. It seemed that there must be someone close to this guest, but Yang Ming didn't know if he knew some relevant information. Meg looked at Bobby calmly, thinking about how to get some information from him when he was drunk. Senior, this first glass is to thank you for your help in the past. Bobby picked up the glass and drank it. And, different from the general clear and sweet fruit wine, and different from the general slightly bitter grain wine, this wine was soft. When it entered the mouth, the strong wine fragrance seemed to explode in the mind, penetrating into the limbs and bones. The delicate and elegant taste, clear and sweet, slipped through the lips and teeth. After swallowing, the fragrance lingered in the lips and teeth, and the aftertaste was endless. Bobby didn't put down the hand holding the glass for a long time. His face was full of shock and aftertaste. Over the years, he had become half an expert in drinking with the senior. This wine was definitely the best wine he had ever drunk in his life. There was no other. He didn't know why, but some things from the past suddenly flashed through his mind. Two middle-aged men who wandered around the taverns on the street, two middle-aged men who vomited all the way after getting drunk, two men who were drunk and hugging each other while sleeping on the streets. Bobby's mood collapsed in an instant, and he began to sob and cry. That was his most respected senior, that was his best drinking buddy in his life, that was his brother who had a life-and-death relationship with him. In one night, everything was gone. Even his family and residents were gone. He just followed the order and did what he should do. Why was he the one who died, and his innocent family? Chapter 2007. In the empty tavern, there was a bottle of wine, a stack of peanuts, 2 wine glasses, and a man who was crying bitterly. The middle-aged man's collapse might happen in an instant. Meg raised his eyebrows slightly, but he didn't have much empathy. Perhaps as Mr. Zhou Shuren said, the joys and sorrows of human beings were not connected. While crying, Bobby poured himself another glass of wine and drank it in one gulp. After drinking the second glass of wine, his mood eased a lot because he was already a little drunk. Therefore, he began to talk to the empty seat opposite him. Senior, although we are officials in the eyes of others, we are just ordinary people. You are still a level 6 knight. I am not even a knight. I don't do anything bad on weekdays. I just listen to the arrangements of the higher-ups. When something happens, why is it all our fault? Tell me, this time, you just followed orders and stamped the seal and sent out the secret order, but in the end, you were caught as well. Military orders are like mountains. If you didn't send out the secret order, you would have been arrested a few days ago. This is a mess. Bobby drank 2 more glasses, and he gradually lost his ability to speak. He began to talk nonsense in a daze. Meg almost understood. This guest was indeed an official of the Ministry of War, and a close senior was involved in this case. He was one of the officials whose family was killed the night before. Don't just drink, eat some peanuts. Meg came to Bobby and sat down. He pushed the stack of drunkard's peanuts that had not been touched in front of Bobby. Bobby looked at him sideways, and his eyes were a little blurred. He was stunned for a while, then he reached out and put a peanut into his mouth. Gotcha. He chewed the peanuts, and the crispy aroma made him sober up a little. He was also in the mood to talk. He pulled Mag along and began to talk about the love and hatred between him and that senior. Oh, it was brotherly love. Meg grabbed a handful of peanuts and became a qualified onlooker. Irina, who was drinking alone, also came over with a bottle of wine curiously. She sipped the wine and listened with relish. When she heard something wonderful, she would cheer. "But does your wife know that you guys are gay?" Irina asked curiously. "Key. Our relationship is pure brotherhood. Do you understand brotherhood?" Bobby tilted his head and looked at Irina. He increased his volume and emphasized. "I know. It's just that brothers are more important than wives. Every day after work, I'll go drink with my brothers." Irina rolled her eyes and looked at Meg from the corner of her eyes. She said murderously, "If you dare to do this, I don't mind losing my wife." "I don't have any brothers," Meg quickly clarified as he looked at Irina, who was half drunk and half murderous. Things are unpredictable. I thought we could drink until we were old." "I didn't expect him to leave before me." Bobby sighed deeply. "Come, drink some more." Meg helped him fill up his glass. Bobby drank it in one gulp and fell into the memories again. "You're saying that the senior was wronged. This matter has nothing to do with him." Meg saw that he was almost done drinking, so he started to guide him. Yes. Yes, who is he? How can he mobilize the border army? Moreover, he launched a war against the orcs and elves at the same time. I'm afraid no one would believe this kind of thing, right? Bobby nodded and said vaguely. Who gave this order? If it was His Majesty, how could he be arrested? Meg continued to ask. You. Why are you asking this? Bobby looked at Meg from the corner of his eyes. He was still a little vigilant. Come. Drink another glass. It's not drunk enough. Meg poured him another glass. Gulp. Bobby drank the wine in one gulp and started to talk again. I heard from the senior that this order was not directly given by His Majesty. It was given by His Royal Highness the Second Prince in the name of His Majesty. I don't know how he hid it from everyone. Later, when His Majesty returned to Rodu, he sent troops to surround the Ministry of War and arrested the senior and several ministers of the Ministry of War. The Ministry of War was investigated from top to bottom. Sigh. What's going on? Moreover, the night before yesterday, a murderer came out of nowhere and killed several ministers of the Ministry of War. He burned them all. Even the complete corpse could not be seen. Now everyone in the Ministry of War is in a panic. No one knows if they will be the next target. The higher-ups have no explanation for this matter. It's too uncomfortable. Bobby was completely drunk before he finished half of his mouth-eye. Luckily, Mag had asked him for the address in advance, and settled the bill with his own hands. He helped him out of the door, hailed a horse-drawn carriage, and instructed the coachman to send him home. Now. Andre is most likely having a headache. Irina staggered to the door, and then fell into Meg's arms unconsciously. I said this wine is strong. You don't believe me, right? Meg looked at Irina, who fell asleep in his arms. He smiled helplessly, carried her up, and sent her upstairs directly. Usually, the fruit wine was not even as strong as beer. Therefore, Bobby and Irina got drunk without drinking much when they encountered Moutai, which had a high alcohol content. After sending Irina upstairs, Meg was about to go downstairs. Amy and poked their heads out from the toy room next door. Father, did Mother go to bed so early today? Amy asked curiously. She drank some wine and is a little drunk, so she went to bed first tonight, Meg said with a smile. If that's the case, okay. Amy nodded, but she rolled her eyes and said, Are you just going to drink and not eat? Meg saw through Amy's thoughts at a glance and said with a smile, There are still some dishes downstairs. If you two are hungry, you can go eat some more. Okay. Amy nodded happily immediately, took Anne's hand and went downstairs. Because she got drunk very quickly, there were still a lot of drunkard's peanuts left on Irina's plate. The 2 plates of cold pig ears and cold pig tongue were almost untouched. Meg poured a glass of warm milk for the 2 little ones. The dishes and milk were actually quite compatible. These peanuts are peeled. Amy picked up her chopsticks, picked up a peanut, and threw it into her mouth. Her cheeks moved quickly, making a chewing sound, like a little squirrel chewing on a pine cone. It smells so good. It's fragrant and crispy. It's delicious. Amy picked up another peanut and put it into her mouth happily. She didn't forget to remind Anne to eat too. And also picked up a peanut and put it into her mouth. She chewed softly with a smile on her face. It seemed like she also liked the taste of drunkard's peanuts. Meow, meow, Ugly Duckling walked around the table and meowed anxiously with its head raised. I want to try this cold pig ears. Amy picked up a piece of pig ear. The thin pig ear had a little white crispy tendon in the middle. It was dipped in chili oil and had a few sesame seeds stuck in it. She put it into her mouth. Chewing, wow. This taste. It's super good. Amy's eyes lit up completely as she chewed happily. Chapter 2008. The 2 children were eating appetizers with warm milk. They swayed left and right under the warm yellow light, and giggled like silver bells from time to time. Meg sat at the side, popping peanuts into his mouth from time to time. There was a glass of beer beside him, and a fatherly smile appeared on his face. On the first day of business, he received a customer. At 9 a.m., Meg pushed open the door and walked out. A gust of cold wind blew, and made him shudder. There were only a few taverns left on the street that were still open. Among them, the Titan Tavern diagonally across the street had the best business. He could still hear faint noises coming from there. The other taverns and the Saipan Tavern were in a similar situation. They probably had more staff than customers. There was not even a shadow on the dark street. There was only the whistling of the cold wind. Even Mag couldn't help but admire those shop owners who were still holding on to their business. They were really lonely waiting here. Business is over. Meg flipped the wooden sign hanging on the door, and turned off the signboard light. The first day of business ended just like that. Although he had only opened 1 order, his turnover had reached 2,030 copper coins. He should have surpassed many of his peers on Romo Street. Just as Meg thought, he could indeed meet some officials of the Roth Empire by opening a tavern here. Perhaps he could get some useful information from them. All right, it's getting late. The 2 little princesses should go upstairs to wash up and go to bed, Meg said to the 2 little ones who were playing a game of rope flipping with a smile after locking the door. All right. Amy put the knitting thread that she had untied into a knot on the table, and jumped down from the chair. She had almost no talent when it came to rope flipping. Annie also stood up and reached out to pick up the messy yarn. Her fingers flipped quickly, and in the blink of an eye, the originally messy knot was untied, and it became a yarn again. She then wrapped it around her wrist a few times. Meg told the 2 little ones a bedtime story. He waited for them to fall asleep before he quietly left the room and closed the door. Just as he was about to wash up and go to bed, there was a sudden knock on the door downstairs. 9 shallow and 1 deep, pooey, 9 light and 1 heavy. This was a familiar rhythm. Meg went downstairs to open the door and saw Noah nervously supporting Melander. He quickly stepped aside to let them in. Meg only returned to the tavern after cleaning up the bloodstains around the tavern. He closed the door and looked at the pale-faced Melander and Noah, who was sweating profusely. He frowned, and asked, "What's the situation?" It's all my fault. I'm such an idiot. Grandpa was seriously injured because he wanted to save me. I'm useless. Noah slapped himself in anger and annoyance. I'm fine. Melander reached out and pressed Noah's hand. His breathing was weak. Grandfather, don't move. Noah hurriedly supported him and begged Meg, Mr. Mac, please save my grandfather. Don't worry. I'll get the medic. Meg comforted Noah and turned to go upstairs. Melander's injury was very serious. With his medical skills, he could only use Band-Aid. He could only send him on his way. Fortunately, there was a super medic upstairs. It was just that she was drunk and he was not sure if she could wake her up. Meg opened the door and saw that Irina, who was originally lying on the bed, was lying on the floor. She was lying on her back with a pillow in her arms. Sure enough, no matter how beautiful a person is, as long as they're drunk, they'll still do things that they can't control. Meg muttered in his heart. He took out the fresh apple juice he bought from the system and went forward to help Irina up. Thirsty, water. Before Meg could speak, Irina said in a daze. Here, water. Meg quickly passed the apple juice to her. Irina grabbed the apple juice with one hand and raised her head to gulp it down. It's delicious, thank you. Irina put the cup into Meg's hand accurately and went back to sleep. Wait a minute. There's a seriously injured person downstairs who needs treatment urgently. Why don't you give her a healing spell before you go back to sleep? Meg quickly held her and did not let her fall. Injured person. Irina turned to look at Meg. She was much more awake than before. Yes. If you don't save her, she'll die. Meg nodded. He had already decided that he would not let her drink Moutai next time. At most, she would drink some red wine and beer. Help me up. Irina ordered. Meg quickly helped her up. Wait for me to change. Irina turned to look at the wardrobe. No need to change. This is good. I'll put a jacket on you. Meg took a down jacket from the side and wrapped it around her. He then helped her downstairs. Downstairs, Noah was as anxious as an ant on a hot pan. Melanti was much calmer. He stuck a few talismans on his body and leaned against the chair without showing the slightest pain on his face. He even comforted Noah. Meg helped Irina downstairs. Noah quickly stepped forward. You can't do it. Irina narrowed her eyes and looked at Noah up and down. No, it's not me. It's my grandfather. Noah quickly shook his head. He smelled the alcohol on Irina's body. Seeing her completely drunk state, he could not help but worry. Could she really cast a spell like this? Here. Meg helped Irina to Melanti. Let go. Irina took away Meg's hand and began to look at Melanti. Mr. Mac, can you do it? Noah walked to Meg and asked softly. It should be fine. Meg was not confident either. Melante's injuries were very serious. There was a big hole in his lower abdomen. His flesh had disappeared as if it had been pierced by a sharp weapon. Moreover, it had been ruthlessly turned around and chewed up the flesh before taking it away. Other than that, there were a few other injuries on his body. There were magic and sword wounds. You're still not dead. Irina looked at Melanti for a while. She tilted her head and looked at him in surprise. Is that how you ask? Melanti, who was still breathing, blushed. He almost vomited blood and died on the spot. Master, please save my grandfather. Noah begged. All right. Irina reached out and a folding chair appeared in her hand. Ha! Everyone in the tavern stared at her. Oh, I took the wrong one. Irina threw the folding chair aside and took out her magic caster's staff. Holy light, cleanse all filth and darkness. Irina raised her magic caster's staff and said secretly. The bright holy light fell on Melante's body. Ah, Melante let out a painful roar. The charms on his body all burned. You used the wrong spell. How can you use holy light for healing? You should use healing spells. Noah exclaimed and wanted to stop her. Are you teaching me how to do things? Irina looked at him. Chapter 2009. RBQ. RBQ. Noah kept quiet out of fear after being glanced at. This was the deterrence of a big shot. Even if she was wrong, she was justified in her wrongdoings. Meg looked at Melante, who was grimacing in pain from the holy light, and his eyelids twitched wildly as well. He glanced at Irina, who was still drunk, and wondered if this would turn into a tragic medical accident. After all, Melante was from the Ghost clan. He would most likely feel uncomfortable in front of the holy light. The holy light lasted for about 3 minutes. Other than the talismans, Meg seemed to vaguely see traces of black gas being purified by the holy light. Melante had already fainted from the pain. It was unknown if he was still alive. Grandpa. Noah wanted to rush forward anxiously. Meg reached out to hold him back because Irina had started to recite a healing spell. Spots of faint golden light fell on Melante's body. The horrifying wound began to regenerate and heal at a speed visible to the naked eye. This process lasted for about 10 minutes. The flesh on Melante's abdomen grew back, and his pale face regained some color. His almost stagnant breathing gradually became smooth and strong. It's done. Irina put away her magic caster's staff. She closed her eyes and fell backward. Luckily, Meg reacted quickly, and caught her in time. She was not completely sober to begin with. After going downstairs and casting a spell to treat such a troublesome injury, she fell asleep again. Grandpa. Noah went forward. Although Melante had not regained consciousness, he was at least out of danger from his condition. Thank you. Thank you. Noah knelt on the ground and thanked Meg and Irina. All right, there are no more rooms upstairs. It's not convenient for you to stay in the tavern. I'll come down and bring you to the house next door. You can stay on Romo Street for a while, Meg said as he carried Irina upstairs. Living next door, won't someone find out, right? Noah carried the unconscious Melander on his back and looked at Meg worriedly. Half of the houses on this street belong to me. You can choose any one of them to stay in later, Meg said calmly as he put on a coat and walked towards the door. Big boss. Noah raised his eyebrows and looked at Meg with admiration. Meg opened the door and observed the surroundings. After confirming that there was no one around, he left the tavern with Noah. In the end, Noah chose a black 2-story building in the corner. The first floor was originally a small tea house, and the second floor was more enclosed. It had all the old furniture, and the original owner had left behind 2 tattered quilts. Meg kicked away the broken quilt that Noah had prepared for them and bought 2 new quilts from the system. After helping him cover them, he watched as Noah gently placed Melander on the bed. What's the situation? How did you get injured so badly? Meg finally asked the question that had been bothering him for a long time. We've been tracking the black demon aura all the way to the first prince's residence. In the end, we were ambushed just as we climbed over the wall and didn't have time to investigate. Grandpa was severely injured in order to save me. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to hurt Grandpa. I'm too useless, Noah said with a look of self-blame. That's right. You're really useless. Meg nodded. This was a classic example of being harmed by a useless teammate. Noah tilted his head and looked at Meg. Although he was indeed blaming himself, it wasn't normal to hear comforting words like, "It's not your fault, you didn't do it on purpose, your grandpa won't blame you." Only by becoming stronger can you have the ability to protect the people you cherish, Meg said calmly. Noah was slightly taken aback. His gaze gradually became firm as he nodded heavily. Don't go out for the next 2 days. There are probably a lot of people in Rodu looking for you. If you get caught, I may not be able to take you away. Meg looked at Noah and said, I'll deliver 3 meals to you. We'll talk about other things after Grandpa gets better. Thank you. Noah bowed to Meg again. He was completely flustered just now. If it weren't for Meg and Irina's help, his grandpa would most likely be dead by now. Drink some and have a good night's sleep. No one will disturb you. Meg put down a small bottle of Moutai and a bag of drunkard's peanuts at the head of the bed. He patted Noah's shoulder and turned to leave. Growl, Noah's stomach grumbled as he didn't have dinner. He opened the paper bag, grabbed a handful of peanuts, and threw them into his mouth. It's so spicy. Aside from the crispiness, the spiciness made his face flush red. As a young man who rarely ate spicy food, his immunity to spicy food was extremely low. He looked around, only to discover that the bottle of wine beside him was the only one left in the room. Pop, Noah pulled out the cork and downed 2 large mouthfuls of wine. Ah, good wine. Even though he didn't know much about wine, he could still tell the difference between good and bad. Noah couldn't help but praise. His grandpa would definitely like it. Good wine quenched the spiciness, and he grabbed another handful of peanuts and threw them into his mouth. He downed the entire bag of peanuts and drank most of the wine in his hand. After putting the cork back on, Noah felt a little drowsy, and he fell asleep on the side of the bed. At the entrance of the Ministry of War, a tall and broad general looked at several knights, and asked, Have you found them? Sir, we split up into 4 groups, but we still lost track of those 2, a knight reported. Useless. You can't even find a severely wounded old man, the general yelled with a displeased expression. All of the knights lowered their heads and didn't dare to say anything. General, that old man was fatally wounded by your spear, so he's most likely already dead. As long as we increase our search efforts, we'll definitely be able to find them soon, a deputy general said. The general's expression eased a little upon hearing that, and he said, Continue to search. They could be the murderers of the night before. His Majesty will reward anyone who finds them. Yes. The knights quickly left after receiving the order. Have they already arrived at Rodu? Interesting. A black fog slowly seeped out from the wall of the first prince's mansion, and a tall figure covered in a black robe walked out of the black fog. His deep voice was as ear-piercing as metal rubbing against each other. The black-robed man looked back in the direction of the mansion, and soon disappeared into a black fog. Senior. Bobby woke up with a start, and sat up from the bed with sweat all over his forehead. Master, are you all right? A middle-aged woman asked with concern as she sat up from the bed and wiped the sweat on his head with a handkerchief. Bobby came back to his senses, and looked at the white paper window outside. His gaze fell on the middle-aged woman who was looking at him with concern. He shook his head, and then asked in confusion, Why am I at home? What happened? Chapter 2010. Yesterday, a coachman sent you back to the house and said that you were drunk in the tavern. Madam poured a glass of water for him and looked at him with some heartache. This kind of thing often happened in the past few years. She knew who her man drank with. Although she would nag a little, she was still at ease. She had heard about the major event that happened in Rodu in the past 2 days even though she didn't go out much. The family of the adult who drank with her man every day was gone overnight, and the adult also died in prison. In the past 2 days, there were many more guards patrolling outside the mansion. The master was also under house arrest in the Ministry of War. She couldn't relax for a long time. Last night, when she heard that the master could go home, she cooked a table of dishes and waited all night. In the end, it was the coachman who sent him back drunk. Am I drunk? Bobby touched his head. He didn't feel nauseous and dizzy after a hangover. Instead, he seemed to have a rare good sleep, and his whole body became much more relaxed. You brought that bottle of wine back. Madame pointed to the white wine bottle on the table. Moutai wine. Looking at the wine bottle, Bobby's memory suddenly became clear. He remembered that he was depressed last night and strolled to Romo Street. As a result, he entered a tavern called Saipan because of the fragrance of wine. He ordered a bottle of wine for 2,000 copper coins. The wine was rich. It was a wine he had never tasted before. Then, he got drunk. Because he was so drunk, he even forgot what happened in the middle. How did I stop the carriage and give the address of my house? How did I remember to bring back the remaining half bottle of Moutai wine? He got up, picked up the Moutai wine on the table and shook it. There was indeed half a bottle left. He couldn't help but be a little surprised that the wine was so strong. Just half a bottle was enough to make him unconscious. Normally, he wouldn't get drunk without 2 or 3 bottles of fruit wine. This boss is also honest. He even let me bring back the rest of the wine. Bobby unplugged the wine cork and smelled the familiar but still amazing wine fragrance. He laughed. Master, it's still early. You should rest for a while. I will ask them to cook some porridge and eat something before you go to the yamen. Madame saw that the master was not depressed, and she secretly breathed a sigh of relief. All right, thank you, madam. Bobby nodded, put down the wine, and looked at her affectionately. The madam was slightly taken aback. She looked at Bobby with reddened eyes, and a smile appeared on her face. She nodded and went out. Life still has to go on. Bobby put the cork back into the bottle, and his gaze gradually became firm. Senior, let me complete your unfinished wish. As for the guy who harmed you and your family, I will definitely make him pay the price. Who am I? Where am I? Irina opened her eyes and blinked. She was a little confused. Then, she looked around and realized that she was lying on the ground. Who kicked me off the bed? She suddenly sat up and looked at the empty bed. There was no one on it. There was a quilt on the floor, and the pillows were arranged neatly. She was covered with a soft quilt. Drunk? She recalled that she seemed to have taken a bottle of wine from the wine cabinet last night. Then, she drank some alone and got drunk. And in his drunken dream, he seemed to have saved someone. Or was that also a dream? You're awake. The door of the room was opened. Meg stood at the door, looking at Irina sitting on the ground and asked with a smile. And, did you arrange for me to sleep on the ground? Irina looked sideways at Meg. Yesterday, you rolled to the ground. In order to prevent you from rolling a second time, I directly helped you to make the bed on the ground. Meg nodded with a smile. Irina, will never fall from the bed. Irina said with a serious face, and her cheeks were slightly red. And get up and have breakfast. I cooked some porridge. Meg looked at her with some affection. I am serious. Irina emphasized. I will call the children. Meg smiled and turned to close the door. Irina clenched her fists. She felt that her authority in this family was being challenged, but her stomach still growled. She had to force herself to get up from the warm mattress on the floor. Then, she changed into a beautiful fairy dress and went downstairs to eat the delicious breakfast porridge that was prepared for her. Generally, the next morning after getting drunk would have a headache and no appetite because of the hangover. But now, she didn't have a headache at all. Instead, she felt that the quality of her sleep last night was very good. Now, she was full of energy and a little hungry. This wine is pretty good. It helps me sleep. Irina muttered as she opened the door and went downstairs. Last night, did I save a person or a ghost? Irina looked at Meg and asked while eating the porridge. Meg thought for a moment and said, "You can say it was a person or a ghost." "Oh, it's that old guy." Irina was deep in thought. They were ambushed at Sean's mansion. They must have fallen into Josh's trap. "It seems that he has already noticed us," Meg said. "This guy is always able to turn his situation around." Irina frowned. "Yes, he does have some talent in certain aspects." Meg nodded. Amy focused on gulping down a bowl of porridge. While Meg was filling her bowl with porridge, she asked curiously, "Father, when will our tavern open?" "I haven't seen a customer yet." "The tavern opens at night." "Last night, when you were playing upstairs, our tavern had already received its first customer," Meg said with a smile. "Is that so?" Amy's eyes widened a little. After thinking for a while, she said, "Then can we continue to go out and eat today?" The little one changed the topic so smoothly that Meg couldn't refuse for a while. Besides, he really didn't have anything to do during the day. Taking the children out to play could be considered as a real relaxation for the winter vacation. He smiled and nodded. "Okay, then let's go somewhere else today and continue to eat, and play. Long live Father." Amy jumped off the chair, hugged Meg's neck, and kissed him on the cheek. Anne's face was also full of joy. "By the way, we haven't eaten the 2 big fat geese we caught yesterday." Amy suddenly thought of something important. "Why don't we go home and eat roast goose tonight?" Okay. "I'll make roast goose for you when we come back tonight," Meg agreed. After breakfast, Meg brought breakfast to Melander and Noah, and the family went out to play again. This family is really happy. "Yeah, I saw that their tavern closed very early last night. They probably didn't even receive a single customer. This is a real experienced player. I'm so envious." The neighbors on Romo Street looked at the family of 4 and sighed. Chapter 2011. "Grandpa, are you okay?" Noah looked at Melanti, who was sitting by the bed, and asked with concern. Melanti was holding the small bottle in his hand. He tilted his head back and poured the remaining wine into his mouth. He smacked his lips a few times, and then slapped Noah's head. "You little brat. You've ruined such a good wine." Noah was stunned. He had almost died, and the first thing he cared about when he woke up was that he had ruined the good wine. Where did this wine come from? "You little brat, you even know how to hide good wine behind my back," Melanti asked Noah. Noah saw that Melanti was full of energy, and he was relieved. He smiled and said, "Mr. Mack gave this to me. It's just a small bottle." "Really just a small bottle?" Melanti was in disbelief. He reached out and flipped through Noah's clothes. "There really isn't a single drop of wine left, but Boss Mag has sent us breakfast." "Have some first," Noah said. Melanti stood up with the help of the bed. He stretched his muscles and lifted his clothes to check the wound on his stomach. The originally horrible wound had regrown, leaving behind a light red scar. "That woman is really ruthless." She used the sacred light technique to burn me to the brink of death. However, she is indeed powerful. She was able to resolve some of the hidden injuries left behind from back then. She was able to heal such a serious injury, Melander said with a sigh. Who is she? She's so powerful. Noah saw Irina cast the spell with his own eyes yesterday. Moreover, she did it while she was drunk. It really shocked him. The holy light spell and the super powerful healing spell. I'm afraid only the princess of the elves can do such a young 10th tier powerhouse, Melandi said with a smile. Princess Irina. Noah was shocked. He even raised his voice a little, but he was confused. But she's not an elf. She's a human. Then do you think we look like humans? Melandi smiled. You mean she's in disguise? Noah thought for a moment and said, that's right. Mr. Mac is Alex, so his wife can only be Princess Irina. But Grandpa, we were chasing after the devil Chi yesterday. Why were we ambushed by humans in the end? Could it be that those humans have already colluded with the devil? Maybe not. He probably knows that there are many soldiers waiting there, so he deliberately used devil Chi to lure us there and kill us with a borrowed knife. Melander shook his head with a serious expression. It seems that our tracking has been discovered. We have to be more cautious. Does he know where we are? Noah was a little nervous. No, he just knows that we will definitely go and find him. That is enough. Melander shook his head and smiled. Otherwise, we would have died last night. What a cunning and terrifying fellow. Noah clenched his fists. Golden Dragon Island. Lewis looked at Douglas, who was standing at the side, and said in a serious voice, the official letter has been sent to Rodu. Andre hasn't given any reply yet, but if this is really a plot by the great old ones as Alex said, then how should we deal with it? Douglas said, Andre is not a reckless and stupid person. He has been patient for decades. He won't be impatient, and he won't put himself in danger. So, I believe Alex's words. I'm afraid that the devil has already controlled Josh and is causing trouble everywhere, trying to start a new race war. If that's the case, what should we do? The orcs are still agitated now. All the races have closed the passage and are preparing for war. Lewis frowned. Maybe we should make a trip to Rodu. Go and negotiate with Andre directly. No, we should go and find Josh and the devil. Andre will never admit that the devil has already controlled Josh. This will make him lose the support of the people. So, we have to find Josh, or force Andre to admit this so that he can come to an agreement with us, Douglas said in a low voice. That's good too. If I'm not wrong, Alex and Irina should be in Rodu now. They are the ones who know the devil the best. Maybe we can find the devil's tracks faster through them. Lewis nodded and said, oh, right. Elizabeth seems to have left Chaos City. I advised the Golden Dragon tribe not to have any extravagant hopes for her. Elizabeth is a frost dragon. Douglas looked at Lewis coldly. That depends on whether you really treat her as one of your own. So many years have passed, and you guys still haven't made any progress in this aspect. Lewis pursed his lips. He wasn't bothered by Douglas' threat at all. Chaos City, Buffett Manor. Grandfather, the borders of the Roth Empire have been sealed. Only the races of the Peace Alliance have left the necessary passage open. However, merchants are restricted from entering and leaving. I'm afraid something big is going to happen this time. Hill stood by the lake and looked at Ian Buffet, who was holding a heater and holding a thin bamboo pole to fish through a hole in the ice. Ian was silent for a long time. He put down the bamboo pole in his hand, and slowly turned to look at the hill with a smile on his old face. Isn't this what we predicted a few years ago? It just happened. But the hill frowned. This was indeed something that the Buffett family had been preparing for a few years ago. It wasn't even the worst outcome. After all, the full-scale war had yet to begin, and many races had already formed peace alliances. Of course, now that all the races were in a state of emergency before the war, the Buffett family's core business, Buffett Banks, was greatly affected and threatened. Buffett Banks had gained a lot of benefits and influence by trading with all the races and providing them with great convenience in terms of funds. Now that business had been stopped, and the situation was unstable, there was already a wave of bank runs in the various regions. Everyone wanted to take back their money from the banks. It was safer to put it in their own pockets. Of course, Buffett Banks had already made the necessary preparations before the peace conference was held. They ensured that the banks in the various regions had sufficient cash flow, and that was why they didn't cause more panic and trouble. We've already done what we should. The current situation is not something that we can control. We can only wait and see what the outcome of the game between the races will be. At least the current situation and prospects are not the worst, Ian said with a smile. The hill nodded. She agreed with Ian's judgment. Ian stood up with a smile and said, "Let's go to the study. I have to write a letter to the Goblin Chief. The people can be blocked, but the goods can still be transported through the railway. At times like this, the crisis is also an opportunity." Chapter 2012. Irina went shopping with the two children, while Meg went to a few places with the excuse of selling food for them. Rodu wasn't an unfamiliar city in Alex's memory. Andrei is quite concerned about his subordinates. Meg was holding a bag of mung bean pastries as he looked at the general's residence not far away. General Bloom was the general whose status in the military was second only to Grand Marshal Dominic. Although he was only at the 7th tier, he was a wise and resourceful general. On the battlefield, the role of a general wasn't to charge into the enemy lines. Bloom was able to rise to the position of general, and become an existence second only to Dominic in the military. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that he was as wise as a demon. The general's residence was already surrounded by guards every 10 steps. The mansions of the various officials in Rodu had become the focus of protection due to the massacres of the Ministry of War. General Bloom had been going in and out of the palace frequently these days. Whether it was on the way to court or at home, there were 10th-tier powerhouses protecting him. Meg was quite familiar with this Bloom. After all, when Alex was at the peak of his power, Bloom was only the third in command of the military. During that rainy night, the few military powerhouses that Meg saw among the ambushers were all under this Bloom's command. This was the man behind Sean, and also one of the important driving forces behind Alex back then. Right at this moment, a horse-drawn carriage drove out of the gate. A corner of the curtain was lifted up, and a face with a goatee flashed past. A dozen or so knights surrounded the horse-drawn carriage. There was a 10th-tier knight leading the way, and several 9th-tier and 8th-tier knights guarding the carriage. Meg stuffed the remaining half of the mung bean pastry into his mouth, and walked around the general's residence unhurriedly with the bag. Then, he entered the food street again, and found Irina and the two children. Meg passed the mung bean pastries to the two children, and said to Irina softly, 1 10th tier, 3 9th tier. There are over 300 guards inside and outside the residence. There are no blind spots. Tonight? Irina looked at Meg. Tonight. Meg nodded. Okay. Irina also took a piece of mung bean cake. This green bean knocked my tooth. Amy spat out a whole mung bean and looked up at Meg with a troubled expression. Father, aren't they all soft mung bean cakes? Bah. Irina also spat out half a mung bean. Looking at the remaining half of the mung bean cake in her hand, she threw it into the dustbin without hesitation. Meg didn't know how the shop owner was able to keep the green beans in such a hard state in the green bean crispy pastry. It was indeed a terrible experience to be able to eat a hard green bean in such a soft dessert. Ding! Mission, request from your daughter. Host, please improve the mung bean crisp production process in this world to make a perfect mung bean crisp. Mission reward, obtain the title of Junior Dessert Master. He also received a mystery gift pack. Mission punishment, eat 50 kilograms of raw mung beans. You have received a basic recipe for mung bean cakes. Host must explore and improve it on his own. At this moment, the system's voice suddenly sounded in Meg's mind. Ha! Meg raised his eyebrows as he looked at the plain text version of the recipe in his mind. This system mission was a little unusual. However, looking at Amy's expectant gaze, Meg thought for a moment and decided to accept this mission. Of course, he definitely didn't compromise because of the penalty of eating 50 kilograms of raw mung beans. The ones outside don't taste good. Why don't we buy some mung beans and try to make it at home? Meg suggested. They were almost done shopping. Okay. Let's go home and make our own mung bean cakes. Amy nodded her little head and raised her hands in agreement. Meg carried a big bag of mung beans home from the market and bought all the ingredients needed to make mung bean cakes. The text version of the recipe was very simple. The core was to peel the skin of the mung beans, soak them, and crush them into a paste. Then, add honey, white sugar, and other ingredients, and set the mung bean cake in a mold. The mung bean cake was completed. Meg looked through the recipe, and roughly knew that the problem with the mung bean cake he bought on the way here lay in the process of crushing the mung beans. This step was too rough, and caused some of the mung beans to slip through the net. Furthermore, the mung bean cake he had just eaten had a lot of mung bean skin, so the texture was worse. Irina looked at Meg, who put down the big bag of mung beans, and curiously asked, "Do you know how to make it?" "Maybe a little." Meg grabbed a handful of mung beans. The mung beans on the Norland continent were bigger, about the size of a soybean. They were plump, smooth, and had a nice texture. Wow, this is so fun. Can we take some away? Amy had also discovered the fun of these round mung beans. She rummaged through the bag with her little hands, but could only grab 5 or 6 at a time. Come on, as long as you don't throw them away, you can play with them. Meg grabbed a box, and filled it to the brim. Thank you, Father. Amy walked away with the box, and sat down at the top of the stairs. She picked up a mung bean, and yelled at Ugly Duckling, you have to bite it back. Meow, Ugly Duckling gave a lazy response, and didn't seem to be very interested. Gurgle, Amy threw the mung bean in her hand, and the round mung bean rolled across the floor, making a string of sounds. The lazy Ugly Duckling's ears instantly stood up, and its unfocused eyes became sharp as it stared at the rolling mung bean. It immediately lay down on the ground, and slowly raised its hind legs, wagged its tail from side to side, and then pounced. Bam! Ugly Duckling's head crashed into the leg of a chair, ha. So stupid. Amy and were convulsing with laughter. Meow, Ugly Duckling got up, shook its head, and let out an aggrieved cry. Here we go again, Amy prompted, and threw another mung bean. This time, Ugly Duckling looked carefully, and after confirming that there was no chair in its way, it pounced forward happily, and pressed down on the rolling mung bean with its paw. Big sister Anne, come and play too. Amy grabbed a handful of mung beans and placed them in Anne's hand, and then threw 2 mung beans at her. Ugly Duckling was flustered again. Meg shook his head with a smile at the sight of the three little guys playing with mung beans so enthusiastically. He took out a large basin, filled half of it with mung beans, and then soaked them in water. Chapter 2013. Do you think Mr. Mac will really not come back for a month? Harrison sighed as he stared at the tightly shut door outside Mamie's. George patted his stomach with a smile, and said, "Didn't you say you wanted to go on a diet? Hurry up and lose some weight while Boss Mag isn't around for a month. She's still waiting for you to marry her." Sigh. I can't shake off her gentleness. Harrison touched his tummy and sighed helplessly. You don't want to marry Miss Georgina anymore? No way. Harrison shook his head. I'll go over there to eat a sesame seed cake and then take a walk. The long line outside Mamie's had decreased. Instead, there were many housewives and study groups from various restaurants sitting in front of the restaurant with small stools and notebooks in their hands as they watched the instructional videos seriously. Mamie's had been closed for the past few days, but the news of the boss teaching 10 dishes for free had spread all over Chaos City. As the most famous restaurant in Chaos City, Mamie's was known for its delicious food and high prices. Once the housewives heard that the boss was going to make the recipes public and conduct instructional videos, many housewives who wanted to improve their culinary skills rushed to the restaurant. And those restaurant owners who had been eyeing Mamie's for a long time even brought their entire kitchen to the restaurant's entrance to copy the recipes after hearing the news. During this period, many restaurants that imitated Mamie's cuisine had opened in Aiden Square, and gained a lot of attention and customers with their gimmicks. If they could learn the essence of a few of the dishes, they would have a signature dish for the restaurant in the future. They wouldn't have to worry about customers at all. A restaurant owner stood in front of his employees, clenched his fists, and said excitedly, "Everyone, be serious. Our goal today is the braised chicken and rice dish. I will appoint whoever learns the best as the head chef of the new restaurant. The salary will be over 100,000 yuan a month." The employees were all pumped up when they heard that. They all took out their notebooks and stared at the screen as they scribbled furiously. Mr. Mac is really a generous man, Mobai, who was squatting in front of the blacksmith's shop with a bowl of rice in his hand, lamented. Will Mr. Mac's business be affected when he comes back? Cece, who was carrying the lunchbox, said worriedly. Since Mr. Mac was not around, she was in charge of delivering food to Mobai and Lulu. You don't have to worry about that at all. Even if these people learn how to cook these dishes, they won't be able to cook food of the same quality as Mr. Mac. Mobai shook his head with a smile. It's just like how we all forge weapons. Even if I were to practice for another 100 years, I still wouldn't be able to compare to a master of Rome. And those who ask for weapons from the masters of Rome will not come to my blacksmith shop to ask me to forge weapons for them. That's true. Cece nodded thoughtfully and put the lunchbox on the ground. Then I'll go and have a look and learn some cooking skills. Soaking the green beans took a long time. After all, they were not in the test field for the god of cookery, so they couldn't speed up the process. So, Meg took advantage of the time to prepare the 2 big fat geese that Amy had brought back yesterday. He put one into the oven and the other into the stew pot. Amy, who had moved the main focus of their play to the kitchen door, witnessed the whole process. As the aroma of roast goose and stew goose wafted out of the kitchen, Amy wiped the tears from the corner of her mouth and sighed. The fat geese smell so good when they die. She glanced at Ugly Duckling while she was at it. Clack. The green beans in Ugly Duckling's mouth fell to the ground. She didn't know if it was because it was hungry for the goose meat in the pot or the stew goose was made according to the method of braised chicken, but with some modifications. He added some shiitake mushrooms instead of potatoes. Although the quality of these geese was not as good as the ones raised by the system, they were fat and big. 2 big geese were enough for their family, who had an amazing appetite. He opened the lid of the oven, and the aroma of roast goose wafted out. He took out the golden roast goose and put it aside to dry. This roast goose was not suitable to be eaten immediately after it came out of the oven. Only after it cooled down would its skin become crispy and its flavor become even better. As such, Meg stir-fried 2 green vegetables. It was the simplest stir-fry, and there was no need for complicated seasonings. After stir-frying, he just sprinkled a few grains of salt, and it was ready to be served. Meg chopped up a wing leg and put it in Ugly Duckling's bowl. The little fellow was already drooling. The goose I caught myself tastes even better. Amy put a piece of roast goose meat into her mouth, and quickly swallowed it along with the bone. She swayed her body happily. Here, try this stew goose. It's my first time making it, so try it. Meg put a piece of wing meat into Irina's bowl. Irina picked up the meat and blew on it before putting it into her mouth. The taste was a little similar to that of braised chicken. The fresh goose meat had a faint mushroom aroma, and the seasonings had already seeped into the meat, making it slightly spicy. The rank odor of the goose meat had been completely removed, and the aroma of the wine was intoxicating. It was a completely different experience. It's delicious. Irina looked at Meg and nodded. There were a few stars in her eyes. It's so good, and you can make it so delicious on your first try. As expected of my man. Meg smiled with satisfaction. He also picked up a piece of goose meat and ate it. Stew goose was a famous dish in the Northeast. It was still a little unorthodox, even though the iron pot was in place. However, the taste was pretty good, and the heat was just right. It was just that the goose was a little fat, and the skin was a little greasy. He would try the goose reared by the system next time. After lunch, the family of 4 cleared the table, and Meg went into the kitchen to peel the skin of the green beans that had been soaked under high pressure. The green beans were swollen from the soaking, and the skin peeled off when he rubbed them with his hands. Father, let me help too. Amy moved a stool over and grabbed a handful of green beans from the basin like Mag did. However, the green beans turned into green popcorn as soon as she rubbed them in her hand. Air. Meg looked at the popcorn that had exploded perfectly, and he didn't know what to say. Wow, it's so amazing. Can I eat it? Amy fed one to Ugly Duckling. Ugly Duckling ate it without thinking. Amy squatted at the side and observed for a long while. Then, she nodded thoughtfully. It's not poisonous. Meow, meow. Ugly Duckling tilted its head and looked at her. It felt as if it had been deceived. Scum, scum, scum. Amy popped a piece of popcorn into her mouth, and chewed it with a crisp sound. It's fragrant and crispy. It's so delicious. Amy's eyes lit up. She distributed the remaining popcorn to everyone, and began to make her own popcorn. Meg looked at her with a smile. This little fellow really could find something to make him happy anytime, anywhere. Meg spent the entire afternoon researching how to make green bean cakes. Irina, on the other hand, was playing games and watching movies with the 2 kids outside. She had completely entered a state of vacation. Come, try this version of iced green bean cake. Meg said with a smile as he came out of the kitchen with a plate of green bean cakes with the images of various animals in his hand. No pop-up window. Chapter 2014. The seemingly simple mung bean cake was the 6th version that Meg had made in the afternoon. Hearing the sound, the 3 of them looked up at Meg and then at the mung bean cake in his hand. Except for Amy, whose eyes were still shining with the light of a glutton, and Irina obviously had a trace of hesitation and resistance in their eyes. I want to eat a bear first, then a penguin. Amy put on a pair of disposable gloves and stuffed the bear mung bean cake into her mouth, one in each hand, and bit off the head. Amy's cheeks were puffed up, and her blue eyes lit up. She blinked and said with some surprise, "It's cold and refreshing. It's so delicious." Irina and Anne, who were still a little hesitant, also reached out and took a mung bean cake. Irina took a small bite. Meg's previous mung bean cakes were indeed better than the mung bean pastries sold on the street in the morning. However, no matter how good something was, one would get sick of it. After eating more than a dozen of them, she felt that her whole body was exuding the fragrance of mung beans. However, the mung bean cake this time was a little strange. It had been frozen and did not become as hard as ice, but the texture had become cold. When the cold mung bean cake entered her mouth, the sweetness was reduced a little, but it was still delicate and refreshing. It melted in her mouth with a gentle bite. The texture was fine and tight, and the fragrance was soft and not sticky. It was indeed very delicious, a change from the previous sweet feeling. And also ate quickly in small bites, and a smile spread from the corner of her mouth. She looked very satisfied with the mung bean cake. "How is it? How does the iced mung bean cake taste?" Meg asked with a smile. "It's delicious. The texture is better, and it doesn't feel too sweet at all. It's many times better than the mung bean pastries in the morning. It's also better than the mung bean pastries before." Irina nodded and looked at Meg with admiration. In just one afternoon, she could clearly feel the changes in this dessert. His talent in cooking was really amazing. "That's good. You guys eat first. I'll make some improvements." Meg put down the tray, took a mung bean cake, took a small bite, and began to taste it carefully. The iced mung bean cake did taste better. The sweetness was reduced a lot, but the delicate texture of the mung bean cake itself was not affected. However, if one tasted it carefully, there were still some lumps. The direction is right. I have the general texture and taste, but it's still very far from perfect. It seems that I have to find time to enter the test field for the god of cookery again. There are still many areas that can be improved. After finishing a piece of mung bean cake, Meg found many problems for himself and started a new round of attempts. Of course, with his current level of mung bean cake, if he sold it, it was enough to dominate the dessert street. Because he had made a lot of mung bean cakes, Mag sent some of them to Melander and Noah's grandfather and granddaughter as their dinner. The perfect tool man. "Mr. Mac, thank you and your wife for saving our lives last night." Melander bowed deeply to Meg and thanked him gratefully. "You're welcome. We have the same goal. It's only right for us to help each other." Meg quickly helped him up. He did not feel that he had done anything big last night. Furthermore, Melander and Noah were only in danger because they were trying to track down Joshua. Thus, it was their duty to help them. "These are some mung bean cakes that I made. Have some. There are 2 plates of fried rice for dinner." Meg put down the food box, drew a circle in the corner of the room, and put down a round plate. "This is..." Noah looked at the round plate and asked in confusion. "This is a simple one-way teleportation circle. It can be used to teleport some items. After that, I will send the food to you through this teleportation circle to avoid unnecessary attention," Meg explained with a smile after setting up the teleportation circle. "That's convenient." Noah came to a realization. "I'm just a little injured. We should continue investigating this matter. Now, we have to delay again." Melander sighed and blamed himself. "It's okay. We can confirm that Joshua is in Rhoda now. He has also found out that we are investigating his whereabouts. Meg smiled. If we continue to follow the demonic aura that he left behind, we will only be led by the nose. We will easily fall into his trap again. Then what should we do? The only thing we can track now is the demonic aura. Noah frowned. Since he can set a trap for us, we can also set a trap to force him out. Or we can reduce his living space. Meg looked at Melander and said, recuperate for a while. We will continue the investigation when your injuries have healed. Leave these few days to us. Okay. Melander nodded and did not force himself. This was Rodu. 10th tier powerhouses gathered very quickly. In his current state, he would only be a burden if he went out. Meg bade farewell and returned to the tavern. On the way back, he met Effie, who was carrying a bag of packed food. He thought that because of what happened last time, this woman would avoid him a little, but he didn't expect that this woman's skin was thicker than he thought. Seeing that he didn't want to avoid arousing suspicion, she came up to him with a smile and said in a coquettish voice, "Hey, isn't this Boss Hades? Why are you out for a walk alone?" I bought some groceries and was about to go back to cook for my wife and children." Meg waved the basket in his hand. There were a few dishes in it. As an outstanding underground worker, Meg strived to make his actions reasonable and natural. Wow, I didn't expect Boss Hades to be a good man who knows how to cook. Effie covered her mouth in surprise. She chuckled and said, "I don't know when I will have the opportunity to try your cooking. Your wife is really a blessed woman." "I'm afraid there is no hope in this lifetime," Meg said with a serious expression. "Effie, I'm here. I won't chat with you anymore. Goodbye, Miss Effie." Meg nodded with a smile, and then turned to enter his own tavern. Humph. Effie looked at the tavern door that was slowly closing. She stomped her feet in annoyance and said to herself, "There is no man that I, Effie, can't charm. Just you wait, you will definitely be mine. A little seductress with insufficient skills." Meg's lips curled up slightly. This level of charm was no longer attractive to him. As soon as Meg closed the door, he met Irina's smiling eyes. Meg knew that she had most likely seen the situation from before. He was secretly glad that he had self-control. "Is the tavern opening tonight?" Irina asked. "Yes, it is still open until 9 o'clock. Meg raised his hand to look at his watch. It was already 6 o'clock in the evening. He opened the door again and flipped the wooden sign on the door to read "Open." It's not too late to do that after the opening hours. Chapter 2015. Bobby, let's have a drink tonight. In the Ministry of War office, a calm middle-aged official patted Bobby's shoulder from behind and said, "Sir Lucian." Bobby looked at the official with some surprise. This was the Deputy Chief of the Ministry of War office, a real figure with real power. On the day when he ordered the attack on the orcs and the elves, he happened to be on leave because of physical reasons, so he escaped the disaster. "Don't be reserved. Let's go and have a drink. Hector is gone. There are not many people in our department who can drink," Lucian said with a smile with a bit of sadness. Hector was Bobby's predecessor, and this Sir Lucian also drank with them a few times. He had a good relationship with the predecessor. Bobby nodded slightly. "Okay, I just found a new tavern on Romo Street yesterday. Their wine is the most delicious I have ever encountered in my life. I will take you to try it." "Oh, there is a new tavern on Romo Street." Lucian was a little surprised. This street had gradually declined over the years like its name. He hadn't gone there for a drink for a long time. I also happened to go there last night. I smelled the wine and entered the tavern. It is indeed a rare wine, said Bobby. Okay, then let's go and try it. Lucian nodded. The two got on Lucian's carriage and went straight to the Saipan Tavern. This is it. Bobby got up and opened the door for Lucian. This is it. Lucian looked at the tavern. It looked ordinary from the outside. Yes. Bobby nodded. Then let's go in and see. Lucian got off the carriage. He really wanted to drink. In the past few days, the Ministry of War had undergone drastic changes. Although he escaped because of illness, he also lost many colleagues and friends. The Ministry of War was in a panic, and he was also in a bad mood. Hector was his colleague for more than 30 years. They entered the Ministry of War in the same batch. They often drank together over the years. He didn't expect Hector to pass away so suddenly. It was really difficult for him to accept. Today, when he came out from the Ministry of War, he just saw Bobby. He knew that this little brother often drank with Hector. They also drank together a few times. He liked Bobby's taste, so he invited him to drink together and mourn Hector. Unlike the noisy tavern across the street, this tavern was very quiet, or rather, a little deserted. Bobby pushed open the door of the tavern. There was no guest in the tavern. Only the tavern owner stood behind the bar and wiped the glasses. Meg looked up and recognized Bobby. Judging from his slightly humble attitude, the middle-aged man who came in behind him had a higher official position than him. Meg quickly recognized Lucian, the capable deputy director of the Ministry of War. Alex had a good impression of him. This was a person with real power in the Ministry of War, the kind who had access to core secrets. Welcome, Meg said with a smile. Lucian looked around the new tavern. The decoration was not luxurious, but it was comfortable. The warm yellow oil lamp made people feel comfortable, and the tavern was very warm. As soon as he entered, he wanted to take off his thick coat. The boss was a young man in his 30s. He looked ordinary and had no memory. He was the kind of person who would be ignored in the crowd, but he looked kind and kind. A new tavern, a young boss, and only 2 guests. This made Lucian's expectations drop to the bottom. It seemed that Bobby's taste was still far from Hector's. Sir, let's sit here. Bobby led Lucian to sit down near the door. He could see the change in Lucian's demeanor, but he was not panicked. This tavern looked ordinary because there was no wine yet. What would you like to drink? Meg asked with a smile. Sir, I drank Moutai yesterday. Would you like to order a bottle of this today to try? Bobby looked at Lucian and asked. Okay. Lucian nodded and looked at the very simple wine list behind the bar. There were only 2 kinds of wine. Moutai was 2,000 copper coins for a bottle, and whiskey was also 2,000 copper coins for a bottle. The price was not low. In addition to the 2 kinds of wine, there were 3 dishes with wine. The price was much cheaper than the wine. This wine list looked a bit shabby. He even wondered if Bobby's taste had deteriorated to this level after Hector's death. I want a bottle of Moutai, and then one of the 3 dishes with wine. Bobby looked at Meg and said. Okay, wait a moment. Meg nodded and turned into the kitchen. After a while, he came out with 3 dishes and a bottle of Moutai. Lucian's gaze was first attracted by the 3 dishes. A plate of peanuts was a common dish in taverns. However, most taverns would come with a plate of peanuts, but this tavern was selling peanuts as a side dish. The other 2 dishes were cold pig ears and cold pig tongue. Just listening to the names of the dishes, he felt no appetite, and he even vaguely felt a little disgusted. However, when the dishes were served, the thinly cut pig ears and pig tongue were wrapped in red chili oil. The spicy smell hit his face, and he couldn't help but gulp. Bobby had already picked up the bottle of Moutai skillfully, untied the red cloth, and then reached out to pull the cork. The aroma of the wine sealed in the bottle immediately spread out in all directions. This fragrance. Lucian's gaze looked over, and he looked at the bottle in Bobby's hand with some surprise. The strong fragrance of the wine was so tempting. Bobby poured the wine into the glass, and the clear wine swayed slightly in the crystal glass. "Please." Bobby held the wine glass with both hands and gently placed it in front of Lucian. Lucian leaned closer and sniffed. He still looked incredulous. He looked at Bobby and said, "This wine, what wine is it?" "Moutai." "It should be a kind of grain wine," said Bobby. "Just by smelling the fragrance, I know it's a good wine. It's a pity that Hector can't taste it." Lucian sighed softly and took a sip of the wine glass. When the wine entered his mouth, it was delicate and soft. It was cool and refreshing. It was so silky when it slid between his lips and teeth. Lucian was not a good drinker, but he had drunk a lot of good wine. Even the wine he drank in the palace had never made him feel so amazing. The fragrance of the wine was hazy and intoxicating. In a trance, he seemed to see when he first entered the Ministry of War. He was high-spirited and said that he would do a great job. Decades had passed in a flash, but things had changed. After a long time, Lucian opened his eyes. His eyes were shining with tears, and he drank the remaining wine in the glass. Bobby glanced at him and did not speak. He also drank the wine in his glass, and then silently filled Lucian's glass. "He is a good person. It's a pity that he left like this. It's too sudden." Lucian looked at the wine glass in front of him and said softly, Chapter 2016. Meg sat behind the bar counter, munching on sunflower seeds as he listened to the two men drinking and reminiscing about their good and drinking friends. The wine was good, and the dishes went well with the wine. After downing half a bottle of Moutai, the two of them began to talk nonsense in their drunken stupor. Even Andre was mocked by them. As an interrogator, Meg wouldn't let go of such an opportunity. He went up to them and sat down at their table. Who are you? Why are you sitting with us?" Lucian was still wary as he tilted his head and looked at Meg. Here. Have another glass." Meg helped him fill up the glass, and then shoved it into his hand. Lucian raised the glass to his mouth mechanically, and finished it in one gulp. His drunken eyes became even more blurry as he put his arm around Meg's shoulder and slurred, Where were we just now?" "We were talking about Josh coming to the court of the Ministry of War and summoning all the officials in the name of His Majesty," Meg said. "Yes. His Highness Josh gathered all the officials in the Ministry of War, and then took out His Majesty's card to order the border troops to attack the orcs and elves." "What did the Ministry of War do?" "I'm just following the rule that His Majesty said back then, and following His Highness Joshua's instructions, I issued the order." Lucian covered his face and sobbed for a while. He couldn't help but cry. But the ones who were convicted were the loyal officials of the Ministry of War, and the ones who died were their family members. How could this be? Under Meg's persuasion, Lucian, a big shot in the Ministry of War, began to pour out his grievances. He told him the inside story of this incident and Andre's attitude. It was first-hand information that even Chaos City might not be able to get. Half an hour later, Meg went out and called Lucian's coachmen and guards in to carry the two drunk men away. "Our business for the day is over. Meg watched as the horse-drawn carriage disappeared into the distance. He flipped over the wooden plaque hanging on the door. He had gained quite a lot of information today. He now had a rough understanding of the current situation in the Roth Empire. Closed again. Is it so boring for rich people to open taverns? AI Faye couldn't help but mutter when she saw the scene of Meg flipping the wooden sign and entering the door while sending a drunken guest out. Compared to being so busy every day, she also wanted to experience this kind of boring life. AI Faye sighed. Alas, it's a pity that we're late. We're leaving now. Irina came down from upstairs and had already finished changing. She wore a tight black night suit, which perfectly highlighted her curvaceous figure. Please wait a moment. Meg went upstairs and changed into a set of black clothes. However, he was wearing a large black robe, and the shadow cast by the huge hat completely covered his face. He lowered his hat. Irina looked at his face and was slightly surprised. Do we look alike? Meg asked with a smile. How did you do it? Irina went up to touch his face. Meg went upstairs, and actually disguised himself as Josh. It was almost exactly the same. I got a mask previously. After wearing it, I can imitate anyone's appearance, Meg explained. Oh. Irina thought for a while, and said, then you can also imitate me. Meg pondered, and said, theoretically, it's not a problem. TSK. Tell me, have you done anything shameful with this mask in the past? Irina asked with a smile. I don't cross-dress. Meg quickly waved his hands. Ha! Irina smiled and took out her magic caster's staff. Then let's go. A golden light flashed, and the two of them disappeared from the tavern. At home. Yes, in the manor. But there's a 10th tier knight guarding outside his room. Leave the knight to me, and Bloom to you. Take care of the details. We only have 3 minutes. Let's go. 2 shadows flitted across the sky above the general's manor. Did you see anything floating by just now? Your eyes must be playing tricks on you. Or did you pay too much last night? It's too fake, the 2 guards outside the walls mumbled. After Meg and Irina entered the manor, they split up. The plan this time was called, Kill Bloom. Of course, killing him was not the goal. How to frame Josh for his death was the key to their plan. Meg's target was that 10th tier knight, and the task of killing Bloom was left to the special effects master and light master Irina. She was to present a large-scale horror film directed by Meg for Bloom. Meg squatted on a nearby tree branch as he looked at the 10th tier knight sitting at the entrance of the room. His long sword was propped up beside him, and even though his eyes were closed, he could still sense the knight's powerful aura. He recognized this knight. Lear was a powerful knight in the military. He was an upright person, and was not Bloom's confidant. He should have been sent to Bloom's manor by Andre to protect him. At this distance, Meg was confident that he could kill him with a flying sword. However, such a flashy way of killing would easily make others think of him. Furthermore, he did not intend to kill Lear. This knight's reputation was very good among the 10th tier knights. It was not worth it for him to die for a villain like Bloom. Therefore, Meg directly jumped out and walked toward Lear, who was sitting at the door. A series of black shadows appeared behind him. Don't panic. These were all special effects. Meg bought them from the system. They were usually used as special effects on stage. At the same time, a bowl-shaped barrier slowly rose up and enveloped the courtyard, temporarily isolating it from the outside world. The knight who had his eyes closed all this time suddenly opened his eyes. At the same time, he grasped the long sword beside him. Looking at the black-robed man who was approaching step by step like a ghost, he slowly stood up and shouted with a dignified expression, "Who are you?" "Kiki." The black-robed figure let out a ghostly cackle, and suddenly accelerated toward the knight. The knight held his sword with both hands, and also charged toward the black-robed figure. At the same time, he issued a warning for help. The two of them were dozens of meters apart, and they clashed in the blink of an eye. The knight held his sword with both hands, and slashed it forward. A terrifying sword intent rose from the sword, as if it could tear through everything. However, the black-robed figure was like a ghost. He glided past the long sword, and apart from a corner of his clothes being cut off, he was completely unharmed. The knight's expression changed. He wanted to turn his long sword around, but something hot stabbed into his back, and he suddenly fell forward. "Ah! Josh!" Right at this moment, a blood-curdling scream suddenly sounded from the house behind. "General!" The knight's expression changed. Ignoring the pain in his back, he turned back to look. Bloom's bedroom had been set ablaze. The flames were burning fiercely, and were quickly spreading out. "Bastard!" The knight raised his sword and pounced toward the black-robed figure. Although the black-robed figure moved like a ghost, he was still cut a few times. Suddenly, he flashed back, and the wide black robe suddenly fell back, revealing his face. "Your Highness Josh!" The knight was shocked, and subconsciously stopped in his tracks. The black-robed figure fled in a panic, and rushed into the fire, disappearing without a trace. End of chapter. Chapter 2017. Enemy Attack. Put out the fire. Lear came to his senses, and rushed into the burning bedroom with his heavy sword. He swatted away the fallen wood with his long sword, and rushed into the fire. After the invisible barrier disappeared, the guards of the general's manor also discovered the abnormality here, and all rushed over with buckets and swords to put out the fire. Not long after, Lear, whose hair was mostly burnt by the fire, rushed out of the fire with a body in his arms. All of the guards gathered around him, and used water to put out the flames on Lear's body before turning to look at the general in Lear's arms. General Bloom, who was originally very muscular, was now only skin and bones. All of his blood essence seemed to have been sucked dry by something, and his expression was extremely horrified, as if he had seen something extremely terrifying. His eyes were wide open even in death. Arg! Lear was in a hurry to save people in the fire, so he didn't notice. Now that he saw Bloom in his arms, he was so shocked that he threw him out. "This! Great General, what happened to you?" All of the guards also hurriedly retreated, and their expressions changed drastically at the sight of Bloom's lifeless body. Lear quickly calmed down, and he looked at Bloom's corpse with a grave expression as he said, "Put out the fire first, and seal this place. Don't tell anyone about this. I'll go into the palace to report this to His Majesty right away." "Yes." All of the guards were in a panic, but they hurriedly responded, and began to put out the fire to prevent it from spreading. During this period of time, the news of the Ministry of War's massacre had already spread throughout Rodu, and they didn't think that they would encounter it today. Thankfully, Sir Lear was here, so they were able to survive. Lear watched as the guards covered Bloom's corpse with a bedsheet before hurriedly leaving for the palace. There were water-type magic casters among the guards, and the fire that hadn't spread was quickly brought under control. "Did you hear anything just now?" "I think I heard Lord Bloom call out, 'Josh,' at the end." "I heard that too, and I also heard Sir Lear call out, 'Josh.' Could it be that Josh was the one who did this?" The guards discussed in low voices, and their expressions gradually became more and more horrified. "Silence. This matter is not to be spread, or your heads will be chopped off." A middle-aged guard yelled coldly. The guards' faces turned cold, and they didn't dare to say another word. The fire in General Bloom's residence wasn't a small matter, and the surrounding residents saw it clearly. Thinking of the tragedy that happened in the past few days, they couldn't help but feel anxious. Scared to death? Meg asked Irina as he watched the flames gradually extinguish. More or less. He fainted from fright. Then, I used a vampire bat to suck his essence blood dry. It's about the same as the corpse you saw last time. Irina nodded. She then looked at Meg's tattered clothes. You were injured by him. I did it on purpose. Otherwise, how could I inadvertently let him see my true appearance? Meg still had to wear Joshua's mask. He smiled as he reached out to take off his mask. Now, let's see how Andre plans to deal with this. Irina smiled. I'm using Joshua's method to frame him. I'm sure he'll be happy to hear that. Bloom's residence was on fire, and the nearby powerhouses quickly gathered. There was no lack of 10th-tier knights and mages among them. When they arrived at the residence, they were all shocked to know that Bloom was dead. When they saw Bloom's corpse, their expressions changed drastically. Such a tragic death couldn't help but remind them of the demon that had been causing panic recently. Under the questioning of the few powerhouses, the matter of Bloom crying out for Joshua before his death was also asked. The 10th-tier knights and great mages looked at each other and saw the fear and horror in each other's eyes. They didn't dare to ask any more questions. During this period of time, the Ministry of War was extremely turbulent because of the war. There were rumors that His Highness Joshua stole His Majesty's commander's seal and started a war against the orcs and elves on his own. The more they knew, the more they were in awe and fear. If Joshua was the one who killed General Bloom, then the massacre of the other ministers of the Ministry of War was probably related to him as well. Murder and arson, the methods were the same. If it weren't for Lear's protection today, the general's residence would have been burned to the ground. Moreover, there were almost no complete corpses left behind in the previous massacres. Today, Lear braved death to carry Bloom's corpse out, but it was so tragic. It was inevitable that people would associate it with the demon. There's another fire. Could it be that someone committed the crime again? Louis stood on the roof of a tall building and looked at the burning house in the distance. There are fluctuations from a battle between powerhouses. Let's go take a look. Douglas appeared beside him and looked in the direction of the fire with a solemn expression. He took a step and appeared 100 meters away. Wait for me. Louis hurriedly followed. The fire at the general's residence made the situation in Rodu very tense. Meanwhile, the couple who committed the murder and arson brought their 2 children home to eat hot pot. Come, try the duck intestine that I just cooked. The beef is ready too. Help yourself. Meg smiled gently and said in a kind tone, just like a loving father and husband. Amy's bowl was full of food. She buried her head in it and couldn't stop eating. Irina chatted with Meg from time to time and helped tend to the food. She was also relaxed and happy. Are you full? Do you want another mutton roll? Meg asked with a smile as he looked at Amy, who finally finished all the food in her bowl. No, Mother said that I have to eat less before going to bed at night. Otherwise, I will become a little fat girl. Amy put down her chopsticks and shook her head obediently. Okay, then. Meg nodded with a smile. Amy really knew how to control herself tonight. She only ate the food of 3 adults. The 2 children couldn't sleep after supper, so they played with Ugly Duckling on the first floor. Meg went to the kitchen to continue studying the recipe and cooking method of green bean cake. He had already mastered the cooking methods of many delicacies, but he didn't have any good desserts. Green bean cake was a good direction for a breakthrough. Moreover, he was also very curious about the mysterious reward from the system. Could it be the recipe for more desserts? The two little fellows liked snacks. If he could make more delicious desserts for them, they would definitely like it. 1 serving of green bean cake with uneven sugar content. 1 serving of green bean cake with a rough texture. 1 serving of green bean cake that is too sticky. The remarks given by the system allowed Meg to accurately understand the problem with this green bean cake and make precise adjustments. Father, I'm so sleepy. Can I go to sleep now? Amy rubbed her sleepy eyes and poked her little head out of the door. 1 serving of green bean cake up to standard. Ding! Congratulations on completing the mission of green bean cake improvement. You have received the title of Elementary Dessert Master. You have also received a dessert gift pack. Please check and accept. Almost at the same time, the system's voice sounded in Meg's mind. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.